For this 1 o'clock presentation, we're going to be dealing with a man that has truly been a pilot all of his life. He got his pilot's license on his 16th birthday, as I understand it. Went in the Air Force subsequent to that, flew the F-100, which you may or may not know is the first of what they call the Century Series fighters. It was the first aircraft that could fly supersonic and level flight. He flew 325 missions in Vietnam, which is remarkable in and of itself. And most of these missions were done as what they call a Misty FAC or Fast FAC pilot, which I'm very curious about myself. They're very, very high risk, very secret missions. Hopefully we can get him to talk a little bit about those today. During his course in Vietnam, he earned no less than a Silver Star, 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 16 Air Medals, and a Purple Heart. I think that's fabulous, sir. After the war, came back, got together with his brother Bert. They started revolutionizing the aircraft development designing. I'm sure you know about composites. I'm sure you know that the Rutans basically started the composite industry. A lot of those aircraft that that Lieutenant Colonel Rutan test flew are probably on this field today. You can see many, many, many different variants of those aircraft, as well as other aircraft that owe their heritage to the composite structures and designing that Dick and his brother did. Also, more recently, you remember in December 1986, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan got in an airplane with a fuselage barely bigger than a large tree, along with co-pilot Jana Yeager. He circumvented the globe in a little over 9 days and 3 minutes. So I think the man's accomplishments speak for themselves. Hopefully we can get him to talk a little bit. What we're going to do is let him speak about his experiences. And later on, we'll have some questions from you guys. We'll work with you, and you can ask him some questions and have him hopefully give you satisfactory answers and let you know more about this wonderful man. So let's have a fine welcome for Mr. Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan.
Thank you, Kurt. Good afternoon, EAAers, Warbird lovers. Hey, it's great to be here. And I'm very proud to stand in front of a very famous airplane, an airplane I flew in combat. Now, I want you to notice something, that the airplane has a single engine, and it has a single seat. Also, I want you to notice that how long the scoop is. It has a big, long scoop out in the front that's real wide to take in the supersonic airflow. It has swept-back wings, kind of low in the back. My airplane, the F-100. Let me take you back in time. The date is August, the 1st of August, and it's in 1968. The location is a place in North Vietnam, and it's called the Quang Ki River Valley. Quang Ki River Valley. And parked on that river valley, up that river valley on a little dirt road beside a real steep karst, is a single truck. It's a flathead Studebaker truck built by the Russians. A lone F-100 rolled in on that truck, and because a couple other people had tried to hit the truck and missed it, we rolled in on that truck, and now we're going to be at real low altitude, violating all the rules of engagement that we're supposed to have. As the airplane came down the chute, real low glide angle, 500 knots, pilot pulled the pipper up on the truck and squeezed the trigger, and 2 20-millimeter cannons woke up and hit the truck and blew it all apart. As the G came on the airplane and it pulled on its way out, the back seat pilot, the guy sitting in the back, felt something hit right underneath his seat and it exploded. He looked back in the mirror and it was full of fire. I always thought that the old F-100 would give me 20 seconds of flying time, that I could always turn and get to a place either out over the water or out over the jungle where I could evade to get rescued. But I looked up that day because of the terrain and because of a big thunderstorm. We were on fire and we're spit out over the Quang Ki River Valley with nice farms and stuff with absolutely no chance of rescue. The airplane was on fire and it was pulling up. And he reached down and he grabbed the ejection handles and he squeezed them and he screamed for Jolly Green. That's a helicopter. and they come and get you sometime. You know, as a little kid, I'll talk a little bit about myself. As a little kid, I always wanted to fly. And like a lot of you, we grew up in the, some of the gray beard guys out there, you grew up basking in the glory of World War II. And I can imagine the guys that got into those P-51s and the B-17s that flew those missions over Europe and over Asia. And I thought about the fact that here's a mission where 3 out of 4 never came back. 3 out of 4 that everybody flew were all casualties. And I just thought what it would be like. And I can imagine a whole squadron of B-17s took out, and only one of them came back out of the squadron. Every one of them was shot down, and the one that got back was so riddled full of holes that never flew again. Think about the courage it must have taken for the people that survived to get in another B-17 and do it again the next day. I couldn't even imagine such a thing. And I knew one thing, I always wondered if Dick Rutan was capable of doing that. Could he actually do that? Could he measure up? God, I wanted to fly planes so bad. From just day one. My brother and I, we had a disease. My mother said, it's being infected by aviation fuel in your veins. And because of a total fascination with aviation, it deprived us of a more rounded personality when we were growing up. My brother wanted to design airplanes, and so he got to go to college. And I wanted to fly airplanes, so I went in the Air Force. I always wanted to go through Air Force pilot training and get those silver wings. Boy, I wanted that so much, even when I was a little tiny kid. My mother used to take me to air shows. Merced Air Force Base, open house. I never forget, sitting on the ramp one day was an RF-84F. And standing beside him was the neatest guy I've ever seen in my life. Had his G-suit on, his flight suit on, and he was standing there with his helmet. And in the windows of that recce airplane, they had scantily clad females. And I thought, wow, oh man, at least that one guy knew what he was fighting for. And I wanted to do something like that real bad, and I never thought I could ever do that. And my mother looked at me and she says, Dick, would you like to do that? Would I? Oh, man, but, not me. I could never do that. It could only be a dream for somebody else. And she looked at me and she says, yes, you can. You can do that if you really want to. And here's how you do it. And for the next years, growing up, she would remind me of what it would feel like to make a contrail high in the stratosphere in a single-engine jet fighter. And she would remind me when I want to go play with my friends that I had homework to do. And so years went by. I went in the Air Force. I went through pilot training. Although I was a flight instructor when I went to pilot training, I never told anybody. Because I didn't want to miss any of it. I wanted every bit of that program that I waited for so many years to go through. Now, rightfully, I was a pretty good pilot. And out of 360 pilots in that class, I graduated number 1. And it's a good thing, too, because we only had 2 F-100s in the class. And everybody thought it was a joke. I says, I'm going to be number 1, and I'm going to get an F-100. And they says, nah, little pogue pilots don't fly F-100s. That's for the more experienced guys, because it's a difficult airplane to fly. But I thought if I wanted to be a fighter pilot, there's only one school. If you wanted to be a real fighter pilot, you had to go through the program at Luke Air Force Base and hone your skills in the gunnery ranges in Kilo Bend. And you had to do it in an F-100. And so when that curtain came by that day and the first guy of the class got to stand up and pick his assignment off the board, I was more surprised than anybody else that I'd been funning with for the last year that they'd have an F-100. And they did. And after survival school and after going through gunnery school, I found myself standing in the officers club at Luke Air Force Base. Now, this is the middle of the Vietnam War. There was guys that were coming back as instructors and guys that were just getting ready to go. So the tenor of the whole thing was really exciting. Boy, was it neat. And I want to tell you that if you've ever had them raise hell in a bar, when you got a bunch of guys going to combat in supersonic fighters, they know how to drink a couple of beers and tell a couple of stories. What they were doing, I think, they lined up all the tables and they poured beer all over them and they would run and jump and see how far they could slide on their belly and how far they could go before they hit the ground on the other side. And I was standing back and I was watching that. And I looked at it and I says, Dick, this is exactly where you want to be. All those years, from a little kid when you first took your airplane ride as a little tiny kid in the back of a J5 Cub in a grass field at Fleabop Airport in Southern California. And here it is. I couldn't imagine being any other place than right now. I was so happy and so thrilled and so proud of myself and my mother and my parents for their encouragement. And Dick Rutan was going to combat. And pretty soon he was going to find out what it was like to be shot at. Meriwether Lewis from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Meriwether Lewis came back from that great adventure. If you ever read that, it's really great. The journals of Lewis and Clark. If you want to find out about the American Indian, how they really were, by the way, they were nothing like Dancing with Wolves on that movie. You can find out what it was really like. But anyway, Meriwether Lewis came back, and a few weeks before he got home, his huntsman shot him in the posterior. 1 round, 4 holes. And he came back and he told the president, and he says, the greatest exhilaration a man or a person can experience is being shot at and missed. Went to Phuket, Vietnam, a little place up in Tu Quoc. I never forget going up there. They riding in a truck out across the rice fields, worried about ambushes to get to this little base way back in the jungle. Brand new base. Just a brand new runway and pure steel planking, living in kind of a half hut and a half the smell of rotting vegetation. But I tell you what, things were happening there that was really exciting. So pretty soon I was going to get a flight, and I had an airplane that was all armed up with rockets and bombs and napalm, and we were going off and hit a target. And this is going to be the very first time. Now what's going to happen? I thought, this is it. Now I'm going to find out what happens when somebody shoots at you. And so we're in and we're rolled in on the target. And I look over there and I can see somebody open up at us. And the tracers are coming up. And that's a defining moment of a warrior. What's going to happen when you realize that somebody is actually trying to kill you? And what you do in the next handful of seconds will define you as a warrior. And what's going to happen in the next 4 seconds will either get you killed. And the psychology is really interesting because the first thing that you look at, you realize, even though you're in war and you're in a combat and you're going into a combat mission, you look over and you see somebody shooting at you. And you think, the audacity of him to shoot at me. Strange. But then the next thing you do will probably get you killed. Even though it's a big radar tracking 37, 57 millimeter gun sight with multiple guns, and you have 4 little 20 millimeter cannons, you say, I'll fix that son of a gun. And you roll in, and you're going to wipe him out. And the flight lead calls and says, Rutan, what are you doing? I says, I got him. He shot at me. He says, get the hell out of there. Huh? Why? Oh, yeah, that's why. And then you get to live another day. And I ask a lot of my other comrades about their first experience when they finally found that somebody was trying to kill them. What was their reaction? And I found it was pretty much similar. You know, would you run and hide? Would you break away? Would you turn into a fetal position? Would you be scared that somebody was trying to take your life? And I don't know what it is, but the phenomenon is that how dare him? I'll fix him. And that will define you as a warrior. And I think it's very similar with a lot of our friends. By the way, how many veterans, can you raise your hand or stand? Veterans, people are in, how many people are in active duty? Keep your hands up, please. Active duty. Here's one other thing I want to ask in the audience. How many of you have a son, a daughter, spouse that's currently or have been in the military? That will mean a lot more of you, right? If you look back at our country's history from the very founding 200 years ago and what they did and what the warriors did, and if you love your freedom, and if you love this country and you like the ability to choose your own leaders, freedom of speech, even the freedom to take a horrible risk like trying to fly a dumb airplane into space or around the world. If you enjoy those freedoms, those people that have their hands up today, you owe them a big debt of gratitude. Thank you very much for your service. And my wife, where is she? There she is. Stand up, Chris. She's a kindergarten teacher, and if you can read this story, If you have the freedom to read it, thank a veteran and thank a teacher. The Missy FAC mission was very interesting. The first time I got to Vietnam, I was flight of 4, going out bombing trees and monkeys, and occasionally we get a Special Forces, a night flare drop on Special Forces camp that was under attack. It was really neat going into Special Forces camp when they were fighting, because there was a bunch of people on this side firing this way, and a bunch of people over here shooting back at them. And you roll in, you're not really sure which one is the bad guys and which one's the good guys. And so we figured out a way to figure that out. What you do is you turn your lights on. And then half of them will turn and shoot at you. Then you turn your lights off, and then you know which one's the bad guys. And then I found out that there was another classified operation that's going on with the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was that thing that came from Haiphong and Hanoi down the panhandle of Vietnam and Laos out into southern Vietnam to support the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese regulars in their war machine. And we had a lot of problems finding the trucks, the truck parks and so forth. They'd run reconnaissance missions up there, and they'd take a lot of pictures, and they'd come back, and an airman down in Saigon, he would look at them and try to see where the transshipment points were and so forth. And then he'd find one maybe, and they'd fly up there, and they probably couldn't find it anyway, and it just was really ineffective. What we needed is somebody with eyes on the ground, somebody with eyes and put their eyeballs right on the truck park and the transshipment point, and then direct flights against it. However, in the South, we could get away with slow-moving O-1 bird dogs or O-2 bird dogs. They got shot down quite a bit. But in North Vietnam, they had SAM missiles, and they had very large caliber radar gun tracking guns, and there was a lot of guns up there. And so they started an operation called Commando Sabre, and they used the two-seat version of the F-100, the two-seat version, and they'd fly by themselves, and they would go up there and do a FAC mission. And the neat part of that was that we had our own tanker support. So our sorties were 4 and 5 hours long. I would get in at dawn, and I would be relieved at noon. Now, we'd go out to the tanker every hour and fill up. But the time that we were low altitude over North Vietnam looking, directing strikes, it was pretty exciting. And there was a lot of rounds deployed at us. In fact, after a while, we got to know the gun sites. And I got to know the ones that were really good and the ones that were really bad. And we took care of the bad ones. We gave them little names. In fact, we had a guy called the Kid on the Karst. And he was on a sharp piece of karst. I don't know how he ever got his .50 caliber up there. But we'd come up the trail every morning, and he would shoot at us. But we were over here, and he'd always shoot over here someplace. And the tracers would float off as we'd circle around him. And we call him the Kid on the Karst. And we absolutely made sure that nobody ever hurt him. If you wanted to get in a whole bunch of trouble, you went and returned fire to the Kid on the Karst. Now, the new guys, they'd say, okay, I want to show you what a 50 caliber machine gun looks like. So we'd bring him up there in the morning, and sure enough, he would fire at us, but he'd never come close. We'd waggle our wings, drop him a box lunch, deliver his mail, make sure that he was happy and content. Kid on the Karst. And every once in a while, they didn't shoot at us all the time, but sometimes we'd going up the road looking at low altitude, and a gun sight would open up, and they'd open up and we'd have our belly up to them. And I didn't see them. And they would fire, and the tracers, the 37s would go by so close you could hear them, the shock waves off the airplane, and that's close. And we'd roll back, and then we could see the smoke drifting off. Yeah, he was good. And so he had to die. And so the drill was we'd orbit up just out of range. We'd call the gunfighters out of Da Nang with gun-killing ordnance, and we'd circle them. And it may take 20 minutes or an hour for them to get up there and get the ordnance. But just to have the relationship with the guns up there and us, because we were up there all the time, every day. What it must have felt like being a gunner, sitting in, here's the Misty orbiting, and pretty soon there would be a flight of F-4s or 105s join us in the orbit. And they knew exactly what the drill was going to be. The Misty was going to roll in, and he was going to put a smoke rocket on the site, and all those fighters were going to drop all their bombs on him. How dare them shoot at me. You know what it feels like the first time you get up on a diving board about 15 feet high and you walk out of the edge of the diving board and you're going to dive into the water? That feeling you have? Ooh, really tingly? Let me tell you, it's exactly the same thing. Because what you have to do is you roll in, and as soon as you roll wings level and down and you start to pull down to market, they know what's going to happen. They know if I can put a mark on them, they were probably going to get hurt. And they would open up at everything they had for you. Now, it's one thing when you fly by like this and they shoot at you and try to lead you. But if you're going directly at the gun sight, is all they have to do is shoot directly at you. And you want to minimize that time as much as possible. So you roll in, you're heading right at the gun sight, and they're firing, and the shells are coming up. And you want to mark, you track about another half second to make sure you don't want to do this over again. And hopefully you want to put the smoke rocket just upwind, so when it billows, it covers the gun sight. And then when the bombers roll in, they have a better chance of survival. And that next, I always did that when I rolled in on that. I says, well, I wonder what the next 5 minutes of my life is going to be like as you rolled in. And it's kind of neat, too, to see them firing and then see all the ordnance go right on top of them. And sometimes the ordnance missed, and they're still firing. A typical mission was that we would get up about 2 or 3 in the morning and go in and eat some powdered eggs that was just gaggy. And the only reason I could ever eat any breakfast that morning was the fact that this may be the last decent meal that I'm going to have for a long, long time. In fact, when our organization was first set up, the general asked somebody to run this operation called Commando Sabre, our call sign was the Misties. It was Colonel Bud Day. He was a major at that time. And he sat up and he got a few volunteers. And they realized that the thing was so high risk, they only asked anybody to fly 120 days. 4 months, that's all they would ask because of the loss rates. But boy, I tell you what, it was exciting. And I kind of like flying by myself. I don't like flying Blue 14 in some formation, whatever. We were there autonomous, that was ours. We owned the whole Route Pack 1 in Laos. Pretty neat. The only trouble is that our commander, Bud Day, got shot down in one of his first missions. He got shot down, and the guy that was with him was named Kippingham. And Bud was in the back seat that day, and he got ejected out of the airplane, and it broke his arm real bad. And he came down and landed in a bomb crater. And he's at the bottom of the bomb crater, and pretty soon he's on the radio, and he sees a rescue helicopter. And he sees it coming over the horizon. It's coming right at him, and he turned and he picked up Kippingham. And the helicopter turned, and it came right for him. And he's standing on the edge of this bomb crater, and just before it got to him, the helicopter turned and left. And he turned around, and there was a kid, couldn't have been more than 12 years old. I'm sorry, probably 14 years old. And he had a World War I Mauser rifle of some kind. And Bud Day was a prisoner of war for the next 7 years. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his conduct as a prisoner of war. And that's another great book that you ought to read, Bud Day. Incredible individual. Anyway, he was our leader, and he was our inspiration. We'd eat those crummy eggs that morning, 2 of us. We'd go and have a 3-hour intelligence briefing. What was going on in Route Pack 1 in North Vietnam, what they wanted to look for, what the activities of the guy that flew the next day, all that information. We got it all together, and we'd take that lonely ride in that van out to our airplane. A 2-place F-100. And we all knew what our jobs were. You get in the airplane. It takes about 20 minutes to fly up into North Vietnam, just off the coast. In the early morning light, you could see the beacon of a KC-135 tanker. We turn and join up with the tanker and fill up full of fuel. We back off in the tanker and head for the coast of North Vietnam. Now, on our way down from 20,000 feet to low altitude, as we came across the pack looking for whatever we're going to find that day, in the early morning hours before the sun would come up, in the jungles of North Vietnam, the rice paddies, the visibility isn't very good. It's kind of like, kind of misty, it's the most serene, beautiful, peaceful thing you've ever seen. As we're coming downhill, I'd put the visor down, chin strap all nice and tight, shoulder harnesses tight, make sure all of our emitters, the transponder was off, the lights were off, the rockets were armed, guns were armed. And then in that last handful of minutes, as the airplane descended to push it up in burner to get it going about 500 knots, and there's the coast. And we try to enter the coast at different places every morning. And again, I would look up and I says, I wonder what the next 5 minutes of my life is going to be like. And as the airplane leveled off, came across the coast, as soon as they would see you, the whole sky erupted. And there was tracers and stuff going all over the place, a big wall of tracers, and we had to find our way through. And then it was the next 5.5 to 6 hours of finding targets, calling fighters in on them, recording what we had seen. There was one day we found the weather was very bad, and it was kind of misty and there wasn't too much going on, but a few of the little mountain tops were still poking up out of the weather. And I was with a guy named Ed Reisinger, and Ed Reisinger, it's one of my first missions, and Ed was flying along, and we saw the mountaintop, so we flew over there to take a look. And what happened was that the trail came up through a pass, and there was about a half a mile to a mile long of the road that was out of the clouds. And we looked close, and sure enough, the thing was full of trucks, because they were running during the daytime, and they thought, wow, being in the fog, they won't see us. And so Ed pulled up, and he says, call Moonbeam or call Cricket and get some fighters up here right away. But then when they saw us, they all tried to get away. So Ed rolls in, and he strafes the first truck just before it went into the fog. And he stopped it. And it kind of get to a turn like that, and it stopped, and about 2 other trucks almost ran into him. And then they realized what was going on up there. So now on this real narrow jungle road, they were trying to back and turn and get backwards. And that was really funny to watch them. Anyway, Ed came around, and he blocked the last truck. And then we had him trapped. And then when the fighters showed up, we had a great truck kill. In fact, for months after that, I would take people up there and show them all the trucks. And he said, this is what happens when you find them. We saw a lot of airplanes get shot down. And a lot of our own airplanes didn't come back either. In fact, we had a party for 5 guys that was going away. Within the next week, all but 2 of them had been shot down. There was one time, it's called the Roman 02 rescue. Sometimes I'd see an airplane that would be on fire, and I'd kind of join up with him and root for him to make it to the coast, hang with it, and finally the old F-105 would blow up and roll inverted. The guy would eject, the parachute would come down, and he'd be floating over an area that was reasonably populated with rice paddies and little villages and stuff. And he knew there was no way to rescue him. On this particular one, he was coming down the rice paddy that day, and I was circling him in the airplane, and I timed it so I came right by, real low, and I could almost recognize his face as I came by, as he landed in the rice paddy, and he was taking his parachute off and his helmet off, and he waved at me as I went by. And I pulled off, and there was a couple of ZPU gunners shooting away, but for some reason you just ignored them because you had something more important. So I pulled up again real hard and came back around, and I was on downwind coming in for another pass. I noticed that there was a black ring, and it looked like a black ring of donuts. It was almost perfectly circled, and our survivor was right in the middle. As I got closer, they were all Vietnamese, and they're all in their black pajamas, and they were all running for him. And as I came by to make the next pass, I could see him running across the rice paddies, and they were chasing him. And when I came by this time to get a real close look at him, I could see that they had machetes and they were chopping him apart. Now, the anxiety of what you were going to do was something pretty bad. You didn't know whether you should go and attack him or he may still be alive, and it's really heartsick to see one of your fellow warriors go down. One other story, and that is the story of Bob Worley, General Bob Worley. Bob Worley was a fighter pilot. Unfortunately, the Vietnam generals were not fighter pilots. There were people that flew for SAC. And they could never understand why, when we flew missions into North Vietnam, that the fighters had to dive down. Why don't you just fly over and drop your bombs on the target? Great leadership, right? I'd just come off the tanker one day. I just backed off the tanker, taken on a full load of fuel, and I heard somebody call Strobe 11. We just took a hit, and we're coming out feet wet. It was an RF-4C, a reconnaissance version of the F-4 Phantom. And they had taken a hit over the Fingers Lake area, and they were coming out. So I backed off the tanker, and I turned, and I listened on the radio long enough to figure out where he was, and I was going to join up with him. So we met him head on. I turned and joined up. Just the time they went feet wet over the Gulf of Tonkin. Now I'm right on his wing, sliding right on his wing, and I'm looking at this F-4. Now the F-4 is probably the second ugliest airplane in the world. But anyway, there's that beautiful, ugly airplane sitting there, and I can see the 2 white helmets, the pilot and the navigator sitting in the back of the wrecky airplane. And all the time I thought I was talking to the pilot in the front seat, the conversation. What's the problem? We got a lot of heat in the back cockpit, some smoke. We also losing some hydraulics, but pretty much everything else is okay. Okay, fine. Hold her steady and I'll take a look at you. So I had to get under real close. I got in real close underneath the airplane, and Harlan and I that was in the airplane with me, Don Harlan, I looked up there, and there was a couple of cracks, and I could look through a little couple of holes up in there, and I could see a little bit of fire up in the nose of the Phantom. But you had to be real close to see it. And yep, they are on fire. So we pulled out on the wing in route formation, and I called them. I said, strobe on one, you got a fire. Up in the nose, underneath the back cockpit, and so forth. They said, okay, we're going to go ahead and bail out. Wow. This is neat. He's feet wet over the Gulf of Tonkin. He's 10,000 feet, 250 knots, an ideal situation for an ejection. Now, I've never seen somebody bail out of an airplane, up real close, and I thought this was going to be a really neat thing. And so Don Harlan and I started my tape recorder, and he pulled out and watched him. And pretty soon, the back canopy comes off, real neat, and it clears the tail by a good margin, and the back seat starts up, and the rocket motor fires, and you can see the flame underneath the seat, and it comes up real stable. It comes up, and as soon as the rocket motor shut off, the little drogue chute come out. He pitched the airplane up on its back. I can still see him right there. The little drogue chute came out, and as soon as the drogue chute started pulling the main parachute out, and it started to inflate, the seat automatically separated, and the seat kept right on going, and he's hanging under the parachute. Wow, that's about the neatest thing I've ever seen. That's really cool. Until I looked back in the front cockpit. And what I saw made my blood run cold, because the entire front of the airplane was engulfed in flames. And what I saw was a front cockpit totally engulfed in flames. The flames were coming through the front cockpit and out the canopy in the back that's now missing. And I looked at it in stark horror. And I called, strobe on one, bail out, bail out. And he just sat there, the white helmet, the fire, just like he didn't even know what happened. Now that's the person I was talking to, I thought. But in reality, I only talked to the guy in the back. But at that time, I thought it was a captain and his second lieutenant navigator that was flying those real dangerous missions in North Vietnam. I knew one thing for sure, that's company grade missions. The field graders and the generals, they have other things to do when those missions are flown. And I'd seen them a lot. And so I screamed at him again and again and again, and he just sat there like he was enjoying it. Now the psychology of this thing is really interesting. Although here's an airplane that's totally engulfed in fire. Even though I can see his helmet, I figured out that the reason he's not injecting is because he cannot hear me. And the only reason that he can hear me is if I drive my old F-100 right underneath that F-4 and then call him on the radio, and then he will hear me. Well, you can think of the absurdity of that. Oh, thanks, Dick. Now that you're closer, I can hear you. I'm really glad you called me. Now I go ahead and eject. It's absurd. But you have to understand what was going through the pilot's mind, my mind. So I screamed at him and screamed at him. And I hit him. I got so close that the air pressure turned him, and it turned him back towards the coast. The airplane was on fire, descending, smoke coming out of it. Now it's all blistered. The canopy's black and charred. Heavy smoke pouring all through the airplane. I stayed right with him and screamed at him. And if it hadn't been for darn Holland right next to me, I'd have crashed right beside him because it was so horrible. The airplane crashed right on the beach. We pulled out, went back, circled the back seater. There was a junk came out to pick him up. Harlan and I strafed him and got him out of the way, and he got rescued. But we'd seen a lot of airplanes go down in North Vietnam, and this was just another one. We went back our mission, and at noon we came back and landed at Phuket, and I pulled in, and there was every colonel that I'd ever seen in the base there waiting for us. I says, Don, I don't know what it was, but it must have been a major screw-up. And then we opened the canopy, and the first colonel ran up to the door, and he was really mad at me. He said, what are you doing here? And I'm still on the interphone with Harlan. I says, Harlan, it's worse than I thought. He said, it was strobe. Why aren't you in Saigon? Well, we were supposed to go to Saigon and debrief the generals. And I says, oh yeah, it was strobe. That's really terrible. But I still had no idea who it was, and I gave the colonel the tape recorder. And I got down the canopy, and he says, they're going to send a scat back up. And he finally realized he didn't know. You don't know who it was, do you? I said, no, I don't. And then he told us, and then we understood what the fuss was. So I had the tape recorder, and they sent a Saberliner up to go in. 2 Pogue upcountry Misties are going to go and spend a bunch of time with generals. That's the last thing in the world I wanted to do, is talk to a general. I listened to the tape on the way to Saigon, and it's a good thing, too, because I had to edit about 18 seconds out of it. You know, whether Nixon's 18 minutes, well, I had Dick Rutan's 18 seconds, and I said something very inappropriate. I flew a whole tour in Misty, and I couldn't imagine going back to flying mundane missions again. Another thing, I was good at it. I thought I was good. I could see all the stuff. I could train people. It's really funny about the gun sights. Those guys on the ground, they didn't know anything about camouflage. And they didn't realize that the leaf, the top and the bottom of a leaf is slightly different in green. And they would they would cut the stuff and they would camouflage their guns. But if you looked at it, if you looked real close, you could see a different shade of green in a perfect circle with about 5 gun emplacements. I never saw a gun the whole time I was up there, but I never missed one of them. Because that one subtle little thing would lead us to see them every time. We used to have a lot of fun at night with them. We'd go up there on night missions, and we'd get bored flying around, so I knew there was a real hot area, so we'd light the afterburner, turn all the lights on, and run for about 4 seconds. Turn everything off, break away real hard, and then roll back, and where we were going to be in about the next 6 seconds, every gun in the world opened up at it. I flew the second tour. We got hit quite a bit of times, but nothing. You know, combat guys, they always think that their cockpit is sacrosanct. They'll blow the heck out of my airplane, but where I sit, nothing will ever happen to it. And I tell you what, it was exciting. I always say that there's a thing when you get shot at, there's a special little adrenaline gland. It's back here someplace. I don't know where it is. If I ever find it, I'm gonna duplicate it. But I'll tell you what, when you get shot at and you're in that kind of environment, that endorphin's pumping in you, and it's the sweetest narcotic you've ever seen. But it's very fatiguing also. I flew the second tour, and I was just starting on my 3rd Misty tour when I got shot. We pulled off the target and got hit, and the thing was full of fire, and there was no way that we were going to make it to the water. But fortunately, the airplane was full of fuel. Now we pulled off and started heading for the coast and pulled it out of afterburner, and the fire went out. But we were just gushing fuel out of the airplane. And so you look at the fuel gauge and it's unwinding like this, and you look at the coast and you look at the fuel gauge and you look at the coast, no fine way we're going to make it. But maybe if we relight the afterburner, maybe we can have enough extra thrust that we can propel us, instead of dumping the fuel out, using it for thrust, maybe we can still make it. And so the 2 guys on our wings, they were sitting there on our wing, and I said, okay, we're going to relight the afterburner. They says, well, it may blow up. I says, well, maybe not. It's our only chance. And so he says, okay, we're going to relight the burner. So the 2 guys on our wings were back here. All of a sudden, they went, boink, up in front of us like that, looking back. And I said some word about a candy posterior or something like that. And so Shaheen and I, we hunkered down and lit the afterburner. And the fire started again, but it wasn't burning inside. And so with an afterburner going, and we cleaned the wings off of all the pylons and the ordnance and the tanks, we're heading for the coast, watching that darn fuel gauge, looking at the coast coming. The airplane in a slow climb went through the Mach number just before we got there. And I always wondered how accurate a fuel gauge would be. You know, you fly in a fighter all the time, and you say, I wonder how accurate this thing really is, because sometimes you come back really low. So I made a special note to watch the fuel gauge when it flamed out. And sure enough, it was 1 needle width below the empty mark when it flamed out. So if you ever fly an F-100 and you're in that situation, you can feel comfortable that it'll have enough fuel. Anyway, it was easy after that. The airplane did a narc, it slowed down under control, and Harlan and I, or Shaheen and I, ejected. And we got picked up. And I got to go home, and I made it. Even coming down the parachute, I realized, you know, I made it. I'd done 3 tours, and nobody is going to ever complain. When I got back to the colonel, I said, sir, is it all right if I don't go up there anymore? He says, you got 2 weeks. You know, you do a lot of things when you're in combat. Like, we would forge papers to go home on emergency leave when we didn't have an emergency. We did some really bad things. Went to Hong Kong a bunch of times. Anyway, I forged some papers and got an extra R&R to Sydney, Australia. For the last 2 weeks I was there. And you need to go to Sydney if you've been in Vietnam for a proper transition back into the real world. Because everything you need for the transition, they have down there. Highly recommended. We came home. You know, one thing that the Vietnam vets came back, they came back to maybe an unappreciative country. But I thought about that a lot, about being spit on by a bunch of long-haired, flea-infested, smelly, dope-smoking hippies who tried to define our country and what they did to our warriors. And what I took back from that was that I realized that all of America was not that way. But one thing I was really upset about all of America is that they sat on their hands at home and they didn't come and do something about those hippies. And I told myself that I will never allow the American flag to be disgraced in my presence ever again. And they better not either, because I got a book I'm going to read to them about it. I flew 4 years in the Cold War. I got shot down there too, out of England. That was great, flying NATO missions, setting nuke alert on the southern belly of the Russians, sitting on a 1 megaton thermal nuclear bomb that was mine, single seat, single engine with a 1 megaton bomb, and just a kid. And if that bell ever went off, our whole world would have changed. And I'm sure glad it never did. And then 20 years went by, and I realized that there was a lot of things I wanted to do, and not one of them had anything to do with the U.S. Air Force. So I went out and joined my brother. We built an airplane and flew it around the world. And he built another airplane and went into space. And the rest is history. But I must tell you that the proudest thing I've ever done, that I have more satisfaction of anything I've ever accomplished, was being in mortal combat in the service of my country. There's a good book that's written, and my wife is here passing out some cards. It's called Bury Us Upside Down. And it's a very well documented book about that operation over North Vietnam. And he brought out about 5 different characters, of which I am one. One of the ones that I talked into coming into that outfit, his name was Howard Williams. And Howard Williams really did not want to be a Misty. I realized later, my very best friend. And on his first checkout, he got shot down, and he got killed. 18 years later, they went back and found Howard. And they talked to the man that buried him. They claimed that he was at the foot of a tree with a broken leg and he was dead. The real story was that Howard fought it out with him in the jungle until he was out of ammo, and then they went up and killed him. And they buried him, and unfortunately he was pre-exhumed by a large jungle animal, and the ceremony that we had in Arlington didn't have much of him left. But it's a story about him and his family and his comrades that flew. And the very last part of the book called Bury Us Upside Down. And what it says is that when I left Vietnam, I wanted to go back. I said, someday I'm going to go back and visit Vietnam on the ground. And I want to go through those areas in Route Pack 1 where we flew those missions. And I want to stand on that spot where that bloody truck was when I got shot. So I rounded up 5 other fellow fighter pilots that flew those missions. And these 2 old gray-beard warriors, 30 years later, they went back. They got a bus and a guide, and we went into North Vietnam. Now, it was always very interesting when we crossed the Ben Hai River from South Vietnam to North Vietnam, the demilitarized zone. And we were on this bus up Route 1, heading up towards that area, and then all of a sudden there was the river, and there was the bridge, and they had another railroad bridge next to it, kind of abandoned. So I stopped the bus, and I said, gentlemen, follow me. We got out of the bus, I walked over to the railroad bridge, and we stood line abreast, 6 old warriors. I said, gentlemen, tin hut, forward, march. And those 6 guys walked line abreast across the Ben Hai River into North Vietnam. And at the end, we did a right wheel. And we all peed in the river in North Vietnam. I want to tell you something, that the North Vietnamese or the Vietnamese people, they're very clever, they're very hardworking, they're very proud people. On our tour through up at that area, I realized that all the effort, all the people that died on the ground and in the air for the war of the Ho Chi Minh Trail was totally, almost absolutely, totally ineffective. Because what I saw on the ground about how clever and innovative and hardworking and proud those people were, they hid most of the stuff, and I don't know that we stopped 10% of the material coming down the road after it was all over. And I was really impressed with those people. And as soon as they get the yoke of communism off of them, they're going to be a major power in the Pacific Rim, and I'm going to be real proud of them. It was in the Rex Hotel these many years later, these 6 graybeards, the roof of the Rex Hotel, I don't know, some of you may remember, that's where all the press and media was for the Vietnam War. And we're sitting there, and the evening was going on, and we're talking about old times, and the waiters were cleaning up the tables. And the lights were going out, and they were looking at us to leave. And one of the 6 Misties stood up, and he says, "Gentlemen, a toast." And he said, "When our flying days are over and our flying days are past, may they bury us upside down so the whole world can kiss our rear." The next morning, the guys got on an airplane in Saigon Airport. As they taxied out, they looked out the window, and they saw a 57 millimeter sight. Only this time, it was not manned, and it was not pointed at them. And I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I would take any of your questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Lieutenant Colonel? Raise your hand. I've got one. Since I've got the mic, I'll take the first one. You said you got shot down and you were headed toward the shore. What was the time span between your punch out and your pickup, and what were you thinking during that amount of time?
Well, he asked what we were thinking during the pickup. I was out in the water, and I was comfortably offshore that nobody was going to come and get us. But I was looking at the shore, and it was close enough, I thought, boy, I knew they were really mad at you. If you want to really tick somebody off, fly over their country and drop bombs on them. That'll really galvanize them to be an enemy of yours. I'll guarantee you that. Actually, when I pull the ejection handles, I says, "Dick, is all you got to do is bail out, and you're going to survive this thing." And frankly, I never thought I was going to make it. But it was too exciting to quit. Is all I got to do is do a normal ejection and get out. And I want to tell you something. I've ejected twice out of 2 F-100s. One in real low altitude on final when the engine blew up and went into the trees. But the sweetest ride you'll ever have is when you sit up straight and squeeze those injection handles, when you know what's going to happen to that airplane in the next handful of seconds. That's a beautiful ride, I'll tell you. Parachute open, hanging in the parachute. And those days we had to modify the parachutes because a circular, it would kind of oscillate back and forth, the old C9 canopy. And they had a 4-line cut thing. And I'd been a life support freako all the time I was in the military. I did all the survival schools, did knew all about the ejection seat, went out and did 54 sport parachute jumps. I wanted to be ready when this time came. I wanted to know what I was doing. So I thought, wow, now I'm going to see. So I evaluated the parachute. Sure enough, it would oscillate like that. So I reached behind me, and I grabbed the right riser, and I cut the 2 shroud lines on that one. And then it had a little bulge in the back of the parachute, and then you could drive around, and it was real stable. You got about 6 knots forward drive. That's cool. So I pulled down the left one that was behind me, and it's really hard because you're hanging on it, so it's really hard to pull it down. And I took the hook blade knife, and I hooked it around the 2 risers. Instead of holding this thing with my left hand and cutting it, I just held it with the knife, and I let go of it. Really a bad thing to do. Because when I let go of it, it pulled the knife up, and by the time it cut the 2 lines, the knife came down and it cut that. There's 4 web risers about this far from your parachute. They go up about this high. There's 4 of them and 28 shroud lines hooked to those 4 risers. I cut the one on the left 95% of the way through with my hook blade knife. Boy, that'd get your attention. I thought, holy bananas, look at all the things that I've done. And I go and kill myself with my own knife after it's already over. And I kept looking at that thing all the time. Anyway, a C-130 was circling us as we were coming down, an AC-130, a Crown Bird. And I was looking at him and waving at him, and everything was cool. And then I was so shook up about this riser cut that I forgot to deploy my water wings till almost the last second. I only got one of them deployed. Now, when we flew up there, I had extra radios, extra batteries, a big machete on one side, a big cowboy revolver, and extra batteries and all kinds of stuff. I'd have just kept right on going down without this. So I got that out, went into the water, got over to the parachute, climbed over, got in the raft. I looked up, and there's the C-130 right there. It's just coming right at me. So I pull it out, and I said, "This is Misty 2-1 Bravo, so you got me in sight." And he says, "Yeah, I saw you in the parachute, but when you went into the water, I lost sight of you." What? He's right there. How could he miss me? I says, "Well, turn left. I'm at your 11 o'clock. Turn left. Okay, now. Steady. I'll come right underneath your left wing. You got me now." He says, "No, don't see it." And then I looked at my radio, and I thought, boy, you talk about something precious. Without this radio, they lost you. How could he lose me? I'm in a raft. But I realized how difficult it is to see. And so finally I vectored him over, and he looked down, he saw me, he turned around, threw a log out that burned for hours, and then he went away to look for my colleague. And about 3 hours later, sitting there, the weather was so beautiful and so calm, and the water was nice and warm, and I'd made it, man. I was over it. The war was over, and I was going to get to go home and see my little girl. I just couldn't believe it. And then finally, over the horizon, 2 Jolly Greens came. One landed beside me. The other one went on to get my colleague. I had said something very inappropriate to the Jolly Greens at one time. I had an F-105 pilot just across the DMZ. He was down, had a broken back, and he was crying, trying to get out. He'd been there all night. They set up a flak trap for him. 2 helicopters came in to get him, and he got shot down. An A-1 Sky Raider there, he got shot down, and he got killed. And then the next day, we were working to get him out, and the general, somebody called and says, call out the forces. It's too dangerous. You know, call them off. We're going to give up on him. And I thought, oh, really? The agreement that we all had, we'll go to North Vietnam, but the rule is if I have a radio and I can remember my authenticator code, you will sail the Missouri up here to get me. Nobody will ever abandon anybody that's still walking around free talking on the radio. And he violated a total rule that we had. Now here I am, a little pogue captain. And I says, who made that decision? He says, well, Crown headquarters down in Saigon. I says, who in Crown made that decision? The arrogance of fighter pilots, I tell you what. Little pogue captain. And they says, well, it was a general officer made that decision. I says, okay, you ask that general officer exactly what I'm supposed to tell his colleague on the ground that you're pulling out and leaving him. I want to know the exact words. And everybody else picked that up too. He says, yeah, Misty, we'll ask him too. Yeah, we'd like to know the answer to that question, that you're going to leave somebody. Although they had set up a flak trap for him. Right after that, I was relieved. I flew back to Phuket and landed. And frankly, I was dejected. They violated a basic understanding that we had between my government and the guys that flew up there, that if we had that radio and we were free and talking, you will bloody come and get us no matter what. I was sitting in the bar, and just before dark, the guy that relieved me, Wells Jackson, he came in and he saw me sitting over there, and he had a big smile on his face, and I was really rejected. And he come up to me, and he says, Dick, they got Dodge out, whatever his name was. They got Dodge out. He says, what? You guys got him out? And he looked at me and he smiled and he says, the general couldn't decide what to tell him. And so they went back and got him. And one of the most bravest acts I've ever seen was the PJ. He'd been in country 3 days. There was an exchange Marine helicopter pilot that was part of the Jolly Greens. He came over and hovered. Although they shot down 2 helicopters and an A-1, this time the guys on the ground with a flak trap around him, they waited until he was in hover, and they put the hoist down. The PJ went down, and he scurried around, and he found him. He found the pilot, who had a broken back, and he got him on the penetrator. And as soon as he started up, he had him on the radio, and everything was quiet, and everything was cool. And the guy's name was Sergeant Tanny. He got the Air Force Cross, very deserved. It was an honor to meet this guy. He started up the penetrator up through the jungle, a couple 300 feet of jungle canopy before they got him free. And he started him up. He says, okay, I got him, pull us up. And about a handful of seconds later, Tanny squeezed the mic button again, and he was screaming. And in the background, you could hear more automatic weapons fire than you can even imagine. I still have the tape today. Automatic weapons fire going all over, and Tanny's screaming, cut us loose, take it out, take it out. Cut me loose, take it out, take it out. And I thought, holy bananas, here's a kid hanging on a string. He's got a survivor with him, and he's looking up, and he's seeing his helicopter just being shredded with anti-aircraft fire. There's pieces of plexiglass raining down over him. There's hydraulic fluid coming out. Bullets going through the windshield, hitting the transmission. And that old Marine, that guy sat there just like he was in a Sunday afternoon drive. Held it in hover until he pulled him out. And he translated over across the DMZ and landed at the rock pile, and the helicopter never flew again. Boy, that's courage. And it's all because the general couldn't decide what to say to a fellow human being. I'm leaving you. Sorry about that. Okay.
You good for that?
Okay, I don't know how much time we got.
It's right at 2 now.
Okay. One or
Does
two
anybody-
questions?
One or two more questions. If anybody got any questions about his flying in Vietnam or maybe even the around the world flight, we got one right here. Stand by.
Gil Larson, Vietnam veteran in the Army Artillery in 1968 and early 69. Anyway, have you had any experience with the Lockheed F-80 at all?
He asked if I had any
Or the T-33 variant of it.
I've flown, he asked about if I had any experience with the F-80. This is the closest that I've ever been to an F-80 in my life. However, I have flown the T-33 quite a bit in training, and it was kind of a workhorse airplane as we were in the Air Force. Great airplane, built like a crowbar. Okay, one more quick question. Hey, I really appreciate your interest, and really appreciate your not forgetting who the vets were and what their sacrifice was, and how meaningful that is to all of us in our way of life and our future. And frankly, right now, our country is under another danger that's probably much more significant than we've ever faced in our whole history. And it's going to take everything we have and a lot of brave soldiers to bring us through this time, but I know they will. God bless. Thank you very much.
Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan, ladies and gentlemen.
We were made for grass, made to feel the joy of each and every blade, between our toes, across our backs, to run over its hills, marvel at its beauty, and find comfort in its stillness. We were made for grass. It's where we battled and celebrated, built monuments, grew families, forged memories, and pushed ourselves farther than ever before. We were made for grass, to care for, nurture, and cultivate. We've always made sure to have a patch of our own, because there's no greater feeling than being on the grass. Except
I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time. Top Gun was really a thrill. I must have done well in actual combat because at the time I was just a lieutenant junior grade, which is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. And so I may have been the very first lieutenant junior grade to go through Top Gun. was the dream of a lifetime come true. I had wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot just like my dad from the time I was 10 years old. STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die. To be an airline pilot, there was mandatory age 60 retirement. I was a NASA astronaut until I was 50 years old. And so I looked at the situation, and I had known a number of Southwest airline pilots. And they were just like me. They were flying because they loved to fly. Well, there's a lot of piloting that goes into it, a tremendous amount of piloting that goes into it, because you're going to wind up passing other airplanes. You're going to get in a duel with another airplane that's fairly closely matched. So there's a ton of satisfaction from doing that. And hey, let's just talk about the racing itself. It's fun to fly low, but it's dangerous.
Added to the Air Force inventory in 1954, the F-100 North American Super Sabre was the first of the supersonic Century series of fighters introduced in the 1950s and 60s. It was the first U.S. Air Force aircraft to exceed Mach 1 in level flight. It was also the first aircraft employed by the Wild Weasels, whose crews used radar-seeking missiles to destroy enemy radar and surface-to-air missile installations. The two-seat F-100F also gained fame flying high-risk missions north of Vietnam's DMZ as a fast-forward air controller. The operation was known as Commando Sabre, and the F-100s used the call sign Misty. Charles Boyd graduated from Air Force pilot training in 1959. And he soon found himself in the cockpit of the hottest fighter jet of the day, the F-100. On April 22, 1966, during his 105th combat mission, Boyd's F-105 was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and he was forced to eject. He would spend the next 2,488 days as a prisoner of North Vietnam. Returning home in February 1973, as one of the POWs repatriated during Operation Homecoming, he chose to remain in the military. He had a 36-year-long career in the Air Force, retiring as the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of U.S. European Command in Germany. He is the only POW to attain the rank of a 4-star general. Dick Rutan grew up in an aviation-oriented family, and he spent his youth building model airplanes with his younger brother, Bert. Rutan's military career began at age 19 as an Air Force aviation cadet. He advanced into fighter aircraft, serving in Vietnam. In 1967, he volunteered to become one of the founding Misties of Operation Commando Sabre. It was high-risk flying. In the 3 years the Misties flew, 28% of them were shot down. Dick Rutan flew 325 combat missions over Vietnam, ejecting twice from Air Force aircraft during his career. He retired having been awarded the Silver Star, 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 16 Air Medals, and a Purple Heart. His time as a civilian has been equally celebrated. He received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Reagan and the 1987 Collier Trophy for piloting the now famous Voyager experimental airplane on the only non-stop, non-refueled, around-the-world flight in history. Dean Cutter Cutshall of Fort Wayne, Indiana, acquired his North American Century Series fighter in 1996. Originally a U.S. Air Force aircraft, it served with the Turkish Air Force until the late 1980s when it was brought back to the U.S. Now immaculately restored in the markings of 6-time ace Francis Gabby Gabreski, the F-100F always wows during its rare airshow appearances. Warbirds in Review presents Dean Cutshall's F-100 and the American heroes General Charles Boyd and Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan.
So you are terrific. Thank you very much. As John said, I'm Connie Boland, the founder of Warbirds in Review. Along with my husband Ed, we had an idea 14 years ago that who would have ever believed that it would come this far. And sorry I'm a little out of breath and running in here, but I've had 2 Mustang flights. I've been out flying a P-51 with Jim Hagedorn. And as I bring up that name, Scott's Miracle-Gro Company is our very generous presenting sponsor. So to Jim, thank you, and not only for this, but for the opportunity that I have to fly the P-51, thanks to he and Jack Roush. Somebody's got to do it, you know. And thanks to all of you for being here and making Warbirds in Review the success that it is. John Tennyson, Scott Guyette, and the whole crew at Sleeping Dog, they have been phenomenal this week. We have this morning did sunrise sorties out of the B-25 that Larry Kelly is flying for us. So look for that footage to come along, and you can see what we do when we go up and fly around and flail around and try to be in formation and look good for the cameras. But that's stuff. Look for that on Flying On Demand TV. It's going to be some good stuff. And just know that we weren't having any fun trying to do that. The Fagan World War II Fighter Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota is the sponsor of our Veterans Coins, which you'll hear more about a little bit later. And to Jelly Belly, if you haven't visited the Warbird membership tent over here, we have a lot of Jelly Belly over there to give you a sugar attack later on. So I think it's just pretty cool to have an F-100 sitting here on our ramp, wouldn't you think? So I've known Dean Cutshall for many, many years. He used to have a P-51 and somehow moved up to the F-100. I suspect that he'll tell us about that. And to Dick Rutan, we appreciate him being here, General Chuck Boyd. It's really pretty clever. I put together this F-100 deal, and I get a call from General Boyd, and he says, you think I could be part of that? And we said, yeah. I think you could be part of that. It'd be really nice. And to our good friend, David Hartman, who is our moderator, and thank you all for being here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Hartman. What a privilege to be with you all here today and for all of us to share in honoring our veterans, our active duty military, and the civilians who are so committed to maintaining the great history and the experiences of these patriots who defended our freedom and continue to do that today. Please welcome Dean Cutshall owns this beautiful airplane. Dean, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us about your airplane. How did you come by it?
Well, in 1992, John Dilley and I and my crew chief, Paul Swick, went to Tracor, which is in the Mojave Desert. It used to be called Flight Systems, and the airplane had been flown back from Turkey about 3 years before that. It was in terrible shape. I made a bid on it and didn't get the bid, unfortunately. About 4 years later, in '96, a gentleman in Texas, Dallas, Texas, called me and said, "Hey, are you interested in the F-100 still?" And I said, "Sure, we'd look at it." John and I and Paul went back to Dallas, Texas, and looked at the bird again and made the same offer we made to Flight Systems, and it was declined. About 6 months later, we get another phone call. It's a little more emergency now, and he says, "Hey, are you still interested?" And I said, "Well, maybe so." He said, "Well, come on down and let's look at it again." So we did. We looked at it, and there was a beautiful T-33 sitting next to it, pristine. And I looked at it and found out that the gentleman also owned the T-33. Looked at John and Paul, and I said, this might be a good deal. So I offered them the same amount that I originally offered him, and I said, I'll take the F-100 and the T-33. I got both airplanes. So it worked out well for me. I'm glad I waited 5 or 6 years. Brought it back to Fort Wayne, flew it to Fort Wayne, and flew it a couple times, had some terrible problems with the airplane, put it to bed for about a year and a half, and $600,000 later, and thanks to my crew chief, Paul Swick, and my engine man, Jim Presbendowski, we know him as Prez. This is what we have today, and it's absolutely beautiful. Prez put a new engine in it. We took the tail off. We took the engine out. We had the tail x-rayed. The slats, everything came off the airplane, and it was completely gone through. Fortunately, we live at a guard base that serviced the F-100s, and every night when I'd go out and take a look and see what was progressing, there the guard guys were. They loved the airplane, and they said, "Boy, this is great. We enjoy working on it." So that's how we came about the airplane. That's the reason it looks so pristine today. Thanks to my crew chiefs, Paul Swick and Prez, and Gordy's around here someplace too.
Dean, thank you very much, sir, and thanks for the airplane.
You're welcome.
You have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank you.
Now, please welcome our guests, Dick Rutan and General Chuck Boyd. Gentlemen. General, start us off. You flew the F-100 before Dick did, back in the early 60s. What was your experience in the F-100? What was the airplane like, and when and where did you fly it?
Well, as I mentioned to Dick before, I think, first of all, it's the first fighter I ever flew. And I think most guys would tell you the same thing. The first one you fly, it's like your first woman. You may have better ones later, but that first one you're never going to forget. I got into the aviation cadet program as a youngster. I was a boy fighter pilot. Didn't have a college degree, but they had this wonderful program where if you could pass the quiz, you could get into flying training and officer training simultaneously. Shortly after I went through, they canceled that and they've never started it again. So timing is everything in life. The only thing I wanted to do was to fly airplanes. From the time I was 7 years old, got my first ride in a Piper Cub, and when I was a teenager, I read Jim Salter's book, The Hunters, and then I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so besides my parents, I guess they were the two most influential people in my life. The F-100, I did well in pilot training, got an F-100, went there. I knew about the F-100. from the time that it had first test flight, I think in '53, and it was the first airplane to go supersonic level flight, and so on and so forth. So when I got a chance to go to Luke, to fighter gunnery school in that airplane, I was on the top of the world. I wouldn't have traded jobs for anybody in the world or any amount of money. And the airplane was everything I thought it'd be. It was. You had to take 6 rides in a 2-seater here before you could get in the C model. And the very first thing I did when I got in that C model is turn the mirrors in so I could see myself in the mirror and make sure that I wasn't having a dream. I took it up to Wickenburg. There's a little area up there that was supersonic. I rolled that rascal on its back and pointed it down and broke the Mach for the first time in my life. And I figured I had won the lottery of life.
So what about active duty, flying the airplane? What kind of missions? Where were you? Squadrons, assignments?
Well, maybe it's worth a minute to put this in some kind of context, and Dick will, I think, remember this. I guess exactly the same. The period in the 50s was one of a drought for the tactical aviation community. The big choice in the early 51 between tactical and strategic air, strategic won for a couple of reasons. Kurt LeMay was a force of nature, and Pete Quesada, who was the tactical guy, well, he lost the toss, and they had one more 4-star billet, and Kurt got it. And he was a bomber guy, and he had a president starting in 52 or 53 who maybe the last one that was really fiscally responsible, and one of the ways he got that way was by limiting expenditures. And he knew he could have nuclear forces and with a deterrent effect that were cheaper than conventional forces. So the money went to SAC. The tactical outfit was hard up. And so a lot of us going through pilot training and what was happening to kids. Very often they go through gunnery school, but they didn't have an assignment, and they go to a GCI site, ground control intercept site, and which for a guy like that's fate worse than death. And that's what we all worried about. So, but when we finished, the times were changing a little bit. Some money was going into tactical forces, and I got an assignment to go to the Philippines. And we had paid homage to the nuclear missions by making these tactical airplanes mission nuclear capable, but so we had to do over-the-shoulder stuff and what have you. But we lived for flying air-to-air and air-to-mud. And this was a sweet airplane. It's the only one I knew, but as far as I was concerned, it was the best airplane in the world. A lot of people were thinking it was a dangerous airplane, and they built 2,294 of them, and 889 of them crashed, and a bunch of kids got killed in them. But for me, the airplane never did a bad thing to me. I never had anything ever happen to it, and I never even had a drag chute failure. It was a perfect airplane for me, and I'll love it till I die.
So you were in the Philippines, but also went to Europe also?
Well, not until I got into the 105.
Okay. But that was the extent of the F-100 experience.
That was the experience. When I left that operational tour in the 100, I said goodbye to that airplane. Never flew it again. Went to the 105 and.
So, Dick, Best airplane you ever flew or not? Do you agree?
It's the best airplane I ever flew, and for the same reason. Now, it had some quirky characteristics, but if you're a young fighter pilot, you take that on as a challenge. You didn't want to fly a mundane airplane. You wanted to fly this Hummer. But anyway, I got the same start that you did, and when I was a little kid and finally just grew up enough to look around, we were basking in the glory of the victory of World War II. And I look around and I just was fascinated about those guys that fought over Nazi Germany and the bombers and the P-51s, and I thought, I wonder if I could do that. Look at the courage. You're the only guy that comes back and a whole squadron is shot down. How in the world do you get in another airplane the next day and do it again? I couldn't imagine that people could actually do that. And it was a haunting thing all my life to find out whether in combat the little Dickie Rutan could do the same thing. Just wonder if it was up to it. And the very first time that this airplane was on public display was at Fresno Air Terminal, and he flew it up from LAX, the factory. And I stood underneath that beautiful snout right there as a little kid, and I looked up at that thing and I thought, wow, it isn't going to get any better than this. And I vowed to myself that someday I was going to fly that airplane and fly it in combat. And then there was one day, the day I'll never forget, just like you. I was standing in the Luke Officers Club, just having completed gunnery school in Luke. Now, if you want to be a real fighter pilot, the only way to get into that is fly F-100s at Luke, right, that gun school. And I was standing in the back of the corner. I just graduated from the gunnery school, and the debauchery that was going on in the club that night. There was guys coming back from Vietnam, and we were all eager, listening to the stories, and we were ready to go. And there was some, it was a little bit of drinking of alcoholic beverages, if I recall, and other activities. And pretty soon I found myself standing in the back of the room and overlooking this scene. And I thought to myself, I got orders to combat right in my pocket. And there was no place on planet Earth that I wanted to be and going to be. It was right there at that time. And I was going to find out whether Dickie Rutan could do that or not.
What year was that, Dick?
That was circa, my Vietnam tour was in 1967 and 1968 during the Tet Offensive.
Right. By the way, how many veterans are here? Raise your hands, please. How many vets? Yeah, great. So, Dick, you got Vietnam squadron, and you begin Misty's. Is that when that started?
Well, that started, but a couple of things about this airplane that is kind of unique in itself. There was some really strange decisions made when this airplane first came into the inventory. Now, I can imagine that the Air Force was just thrilled to death. They were going to have a supersonic airplane at level flight. Wow. Now, in those days, we didn't have central air data computers and stuff. And North American told the Air Force, he says, hey, look, it's the pedostatic system. You know, they do not have a lot of experience in making a pedostatic system that would work. The big boom was going to help, but they said to the Air Force, now you can either have a pedostatic system that's accurate at slow speed, or you can have it accurate at supersonic speed. And so for some reason, somebody decided, wow, supersonic, that's really fast. The pilots need to know exactly what their altitude and airspeed is supersonic. Not even thinking that 1/10,000th of the flying time of all the F-100s would ever be supersonic. And so we found ourselves on GCA final approach, breaking out at minimums, 200 feet, and I'll never forget that the altimeter would unwind to 50 foot below the altitude. And we're doing at 500 knot laydowns, and the altimeter would be almost 2,000 feet in air. And if you would change back and forth a little bit, the altimeters would go all over the place. But boy, as soon as you went out of the Mach, it would swing around, whoop, and now we're accurate. Wow, we have accurate supersonic. Another thing, too, is that this is an airplane that actually has to be flown by the pilot. Wherever you move the controls, that's what the flight services do. Now, that's kind of strange to you F-16 guys, but the pilot actually had to move the controls and to move the control surface. Now, one thing about the F-100, it had a little directional problem, especially the early ones, right, the A models. And some guy was landed at Edwards Air Force Base, and he got the nose high a little bit, And the burner at those days, they didn't light very reliably at high angles of attack. And he got into classic saber dance, and I think every one of you has seen that. And I know when I went into gunnery school, they sat down and says, welcome to F-100 training. We got a little film we want to show you guys. And so we all got to sit there and watch the saber dance. But that was they tried to fix the tail and make it a little bigger and a little bit more rudder and try to refine that. But all in all, when you're in air-to-air combat, ACM and training, that the real good guys, they could pull the nose around and they can get it right on the very edge of a burble. And if you wanted to reverse course, you didn't do it with rudder, you just did it with if you got to be careful, just a little opposite aileron and whap, you'd be around to the right side. And the adversary, he couldn't do that unless he was doing it just right. But what a fantastic airplane. Another thing is it had a hard light, the afterburner. And it had this squirrel cage. This is an afterburner that was stolen from an F-102, and they were very reliable. But the old squirrel cages, when that thing would light, if you had a lot of, kind of slow and a lot of angle of attack on the airplane, and you push it up the mill and put it out the burner, you'd always kind of hunker down like that. Because you could feel the engine, it would go, ew, bam! And fire would shoot out the front, and dirt would fly up in your face, and you say, ooh, wow, that was really cool. So after a while, you got the thing that you could unload it to a lower angle of attack, and you put it out burn, but you put it all the way in min burner. And then you could feel the eyelids finally come open. Now they're open. Now you can gun it, and now you're in full afterburner. So it was really a strange, neat airplane.
So, get back to mission. Yes.
John, let me add just
me.
one little thing to reinforce what
General.
Dick said. And that compressor stall required an underwear change. But in the quirkiness that he mentioned you had to fly this airplane, I'm going to tell you a secondhand story, but it's one that really, I think, gets to the heart of it. Chuck Yeager was a squadron commander of the 1st Fighter Day Squadron at George, and he always flew the F model. I wasn't around, but some of my buddies were there. He always flew the F model, and everyone wanted to fly in the back seat with Yeager, because Yeager was, this giant of a fighter pilot and so forth. So my friend Buzz Byrne was in the back seat with him one day, and they go out and they shoot on the rag, and he shoots, he shoots better on the rag than anybody in the squadron ever thought about shooting. And they come back in and go into the traffic pattern, and he breaks, and he said, the needle, the vertical speed needle never moved a tiny bit. Down on downwind, bang, the gear down, turn base leg, perfect pattern, drops the needle to stay right there, comes around on final, most perfect traffic pattern you'd ever seen. And they get down and they get just about to touch down and they go boom, boom. So Yeager pulls the chute and holds the nose off for a while and drops the nose, turns off, and he says, I've flown 112 different airplanes, and this is the only son of a bitch I could never land.
So, Dick, back to Vietnam. Your missions. What were you flying?
Well, I flew the F-100. I got an assignment to Phuket, which is about halfway up between the South Vietnamese area. Phuket, what a neat name. Of course, we had a special adaptation to that name. But anyway, that was home to me. And you may have heard of Bud Day. I'm sure you've heard of Bud Day. Anyway, as a major, he was given the task to see if we could survive as forward air controller over North Vietnam. And it was very intense anti-aircraft fire with MiGs and SAMs and everybody shooting at you from small arms to SAM missiles. But we had a problem about finding targets up there and hitting them accurately. So they decided we're going to run a forward air control mission to see if it would work. And Bud Day was given that task, and he rounded up a handful of volunteers. And up until then, I was a single-seat, single-engine fighter pilot. And nobody wanted to fly a two-place airplane. Holy bananas, why would they want to do that? Anyway, I flew in country, single seat a little bit, but I got really bored. because I'm blue 14 on the edge of the formation. We come in at high altitude. There's a FAC down there, and there's all kinds of exciting things going on down there. And he marks it. We roll in, drop our bombs, and leave. And I says, wow, there's some exciting stuff going on down there. You know, I'd like to be part of it and know more about it. Anyway, Bud Day and I, we went through the gunnery school at the same time. And he lived right next door from us there at Luke. And him and Dory, they had a couple of kids, little kids. And they had, he left me with a whole bunch of these cars. I mean, broken down cars. I said, how could a guy go to war and leave his wife with these horrible automobiles? And so I spent a lot of my spare time fixing Bud Day's junk cars that he left there. And so then when I got assigned to FUCAT, I went, hey, Bud Day is here. And so I went running up. When I first got there, I went running up to the little Misty outfit that was out in the back, little back corner in wing headquarters. And I come running in. I says, where the hell is Bud Day? I got a bone to pick with him. And very solemnly, they looked at me, and he says, Bud Day was just killed yesterday. And that was the acronym for being shot down. And I thought, my God, this is war. People really do get hurt.
Misty's, where'd that name come from? What's it mean?
Misty was the call sign, and it came from Bud Day, and I think he liked the song a lot. But then when I found out what they were doing up there, and our missions were about 6 hours long. We had our own dedicated tanker off the coast of North Vietnam. And we'd come up there, and we would penetrate North Vietnam at low altitude right at dawn. And about an hour in.
How low altitude?
Oh, 3,000 or 4,000 feet, sometimes lower. And it was really funny. You get up and you have a 1 hour intelligence briefing for the front seater, back seater. Now, the thing about the Misties, we didn't have a pilot-co-pilot relationship. Every other mission we would swap, front and back. The guy was in the back, he was the secretary, and he was really busy. He took all the film, he recorded all the sightings, all the visual reconnaissance things. He checked all the fighters in. He found out their ordnance. He briefed them on the target. And then the front seater actually marked the target and put them in, and then we give them their bomb damage assessment and sent them on their way. And a lot of times, the bomb damage assessment was none of your ordnance was within 10,000 meters of our target, no visible damage. Have a nice day.
How'd you mark the targets?
Well, the F-100 was set up. We had 7 Willie Pete rockets on each outboard pylon. And it was, we could fire them singly, and there were white phosphorus. Call them Willie Pete's. And you'd fire this thing down, and it would glow with smoke for a while, and then you could mark them. But I wanted to go to Misty so bad. I didn't want to be in country anymore. He says, well, you're a new pilot, and you can only be flight leads can go there. I says, okay, what do I got to do to be a flight lead? He says, well, Rutan, you're a long ways from that status. It may take you 6 months to work to be a combat flight lead. But I kept bugging him and bugging him and bugging him, and finally the commander says, all right, God damn it, Rutan, we're going to give you a flight lead checkout. And so I went out, and I was no more qualified to be a flight lead, but I got the flight of 4 out, and we actually hit a target, and we came back, and he says, now get the hell out of here. I'm tired of you bitching about it. And I stayed in Misty the whole time. Misty had a very high loss rate. They only wanted people to stay there for 120 days. It was 3 months. And they figured that loss rate was going to be reasonable, that nobody could, well, whatever, with a 28% loss rate, that's all they asked for. And it was supposed to be volunteers. I did my first 120 days, and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. And there was no fine way that I was going to go back busting trees and killing monkeys again. So I talked them into a second tour, and I got shot on my start of my 3rd tour.
Describe that. What was the shoot down? How did it happen?
Well, I got in the way of a big anti-aircraft round one day. And it's ironic because then I bugged the 105 guys and I stole their patch. They got a really neat patch that says North Vietnam, 100 missions, and an F-105. Now, when I got shot down, I realized, wait a minute, I have 105 missions and an F-100. And so I took their patch and swapped the 0 and the 5 over, and I wear it. Now, all the 105 guys, they look at it, and it takes a long time for them to realize that it's 105 missions in an F-100, not the other way around. So we had a lot of fun with that.
You bailed out?
Yeah, well, he ejected.
Ejected.
During the 105 missions as a Misty, we would fly, our missions would be 4 and 5 hours at a time. We'd get up really early in the morning, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, go through a 2-hour intelligence briefing about what happened there before, some of the targets that were struck at night, and so forth and so on. We'd record all that data. We'd go out and pre-flight our lone F-100 at Phuket in the early morning mist, and it was very quiet. Just about an hour and a half before dawn, and every day at Phuket, a lone F-100F with a misty call sign would roll down the runway and climb into the mist of South Vietnam. And we'd fly up north, we'd rendezvous with our tanker off the coast, and then you want to do a random penetration every day. But after a while, they got to know who we were, and they didn't mess with us a whole lot. Because my personal philosophy is, if you're a good gunner and you shoot at me, I'm going to come back and frickin' kill you. Now, when that happened, there was a lot of gunners up there, and since you're up there half a day every time in your area, you know where all the gun crews were, and we'd all give them grades about how good they were. And in the really bad gun crews, we'd fly over and drop them candy and deliver their mail and stuff. But every once in a while, there'd be a good one, and they would lead you just right, and the tracers or the 37 millimeter would come by the cockpit so close that you could feel the shock waves coming off. And then you'd roll back, and there he was, and it's a classic ring floating off this gun sight. And I thought, well, you son of a gun, or words to that effect, and I'd orbit up over him, and I'd try to get some F-105s from the Alpha Strike Force that were going into Hanoi, or scramble the gunfighters out of Da Nang. And I thought, that guy is good. And I always wondered what it would feel like orbiting just out of range over him, and they knew what the drill was. And pretty soon there'd be 4 other fighters join me in the orbit. And they knew that if the Misty marked them, they were probably in for a lot of hurt. Now, the excitement to do that, and you think, okay, you're going to roll in, and the Misty rolls his wings over, and he pulls his nose down. And at that time, you're pointed right at the gun sight for just a handful of seconds. And they don't have any lead trajectory. They don't have to do anything but shoot right back directly at you. Before, we were jinking all the time, and they have to lead you. That was a challenge. But for this handful of seconds, they knew that if that guy marked them, they were gone. And as soon as you roll the wings over and start the nose down, the whole place erupted with all kinds of tracers coming by. And I was thinking about when I was a little kid, I had the courage to get up on the high dive board and walk out in the end and look down. You know the feeling that you had the first time? Well, I had that feeling every time I rolled in. And boy, was this exciting. And you hold it up, you try to mark them so the smoke would billow and billow over the gun sight, so when Lead rolled in with his bombs, they had some obscure it. And then Lead would come down, drop his bombs. We'd come back and do an opposite direction and try to draw some fire with number 2 down the chute. And so for a handful of minutes, it was really exciting doing gun kills, and I loved it. And you could see a big stick of daisy cutters come off of an F-105 one day, and you see them come off, and you see the gun sight just firing like mad, and they come down, and they come down, and they come down, and then all of a sudden, they just blow the crap out of them. And I'd come by in a low pass, and you could see guns laying on their side and stuff, and I'd pull off and do a roll, and it says, well, fool around with a Misty, you. And I said, and anyway, the word got around quite a bit, and we had a relationship with them, and they really didn't mess with us a whole lot, sometimes. But every once in a while, they were trying to protect something, and you come over the horizon, and the whole place would light up, and they would just draw you to a target. What are these guys protecting this morning? And so we'd sniff around and find it. Aha! Call the gunfighters, call the thuds out of Thailand. We got us a good target. But man, it was exciting.
How were you rescued? How were you evacuated after you ejected? And were you over the north or the south?
Oh, no, I was over the north. I flew a few missions in the south. That's not where the action was. But the majority of it was, I was the second guy to fly 100 Misty missions. Nobody had ever done that before. Eben Jones was the first guy to do that. And I flew 105. That was 105 that day. And we went up and checked out the F4 Phantoms. Ever heard of an F4 Phantom? Double ugly. God. Anyway, I was going to go up and check them out in Da Nang, and so I went up there one day, and they were flying the same Misty profile. Went up, refueled, and now that ugly smoking F-104 or F4 came down the same place that we did every morning, or randomly, and then they didn't know. They said, hey, that's not a Misty. We got to shoot him. And the whole mission, they shot the crap out of us. And I kept screaming, it's a Misty, you guys. It's a Misty. Quit shooting at me. Anyway, that wasn't a whole lot of fun. But that one day in late September of 1986, we're in on a truck.
66?
What did I say?
86. But yeah, go ahead.
19. I got Voyager mixed up. 1968.
Okay.
Up the Quankey River Valley, about 30, 40 miles. We put a flight of fighters in on this truck that we needed to kill, and they all missed. And every once in a while, the Misty would just say, the guys went up there 2 or 3 flights, miss everything. And we weren't supposed to do that. And so we'd come back around, and I'd strafe with our cannon here. I'd strafe 3 or 4 trucks and pull off. But then I couldn't take credit for it. I'd happen to give it to the guys that couldn't hit the ground barely. I says, oh, by the way, guys, I'm going to add 3 trucks to your kill so you can take that home. And their ordnance never came anywhere close. But and this day, those guys all missed. And for some reason, we kind of broke a rule, and the guy was with, his name is Chuck Shaheen, and he was finishing his first tour. And we were high school guys in the same area. And I says, hey, Chuck, this is your Champagne mission. Why don't I go with you? And I thought we were going to have a little thing in the Orange Cove Register that said, 2 local boys finished last mission. And so I went with Chuck on his last mission. And we went down and we tried to do a angle strafe. And we looked around and he thought, that damn truck. And so Chuck got right down in the weeds, which violated all the rules that we're supposed to, at about a 2-degree angle strafe pass. And I was looking around the corner and Chuck opened fire and blew the hell out of the truck. And when he pulled off, bang, fire. Ripped a big hole in the belly right underneath my seat. We started dumping fuel out like mad, and it was torching, burning. Now, I always thought the F-100 could give me 20 seconds of flying. Every time I rolled in, it says, where's 20 seconds that I can go to bail out and hopefully get rescued in some way, or the jungle or maybe get feet wet. And I pulled up on fire, burning like mad, and I looked around, and it was just a coastal plain, and there was no way that you were going to land in that area and not get captured. And then we started turning towards the coast, and I could see the coast way over there. And I looked at the total fuel gauge, and the total fuel gauge was unwinding because we're just dumping fuel like mad. And you look at the coast, and you look at the total fuel gauge, and you say, there's no fine way we're going to make it. And then Chuck says, well, why don't we light the afterburner? And we talked about that with the guys around us, and they says, well, it may blow up. See, it's got fuel all inside. But then I thought about prisoner of war and all those bad people down there that were really mad at us. And I thought, Chuck, why don't we give it a shot? And so the guys that were on our wing, we talked about that. And the next thing I know, they were up in front of us looking back at us. And so we gritted our teeth and closed our eyes, pushed it up and lit the burner. And it didn't blow up. So we used the fuel instead of torching to use it for acceleration. And at 1.3 Mach at about 15,000 feet, 15 miles from the coast, the old F-100 flamed out. And she did a nice parabolic arc over the coast and a perfect controlled ejection. And ejected, got in the raft, got picked up by the Jollies, wrapped up, because I knew when we're on fire, and I made a thing to myself, nobody had flown more missions. Nobody had more time over North Vietnam than I did. And when we pulled off, and I says, if I can just get out and I can get rescued, I am not coming up here again. I can get to see my kids, and I didn't really think I'd ever get to do that. Anyway, sure enough, ejected, went down on the raft. A couple, 3 hours later, the Jollies come picked us up. And I was so relieved after that. I wrapped up in a blanket in the back of the Jolly Green, and an hour-and-a-half flight back to Da Nang, I went to sleep.
Wow.
I was going home.
General, F-105, Thuds. Where did it get that name, Thud?
Well, they were crashing quite a few of them, and they go thud when they hit the ground.
I didn't think you'd ever admit that. That's what the F-100 guy said.
So what were your missions? You were flying out of where, Thailand?
Yes, I was flying out of Karat I've been in and out of Thailand starting actually in the 100 days, well before the war. But by the time I went back there, PCS, I was flying out of Karat. And we were doing bombing missions mostly on assigned targets in various places in North Vietnam.
Hey,
Some
General.
road reconnaissance.
Right up in.
All right.
There you go.
some road reconnaissance missions, but mostly fixed target missions.
Right. We've heard that the Vietnamese seemed to know where you were coming and when you were coming. How accurate is that?
Well, there are a lot of theories on that they had help from our own government. I've never bought that theory, but that's a widely held view. There are rumors that the 7th Air Force was infiltrated and they were getting the frags information. I don't know that that's true, but what I do know is that if they were important targets, it seemed like they really had a lot of capability there to be shooting at us. And I do know that we on some important things that needed to be done that any competent commander would insist upon doing, we were forbidden from doing. For example, we sat and watched the SAM sites being built. I say watched by reconnaissance photography. And we were forbidden to go in and strike those targets that were under construction until they were fully operational, and then we were allowed to go at a point where it was a dicey business to be doing.
Have you any idea what the reasoning was behind keeping you from blowing them up while they were being built?
It seemed to be that we only wanted to aggravate them up to a certain level. Or other theories were there are a lot of Soviet guys that are on those sites doing the construction, and we didn't want to kill any of them. But I really don't know. I think we had a massively incompetent White House at the time who really didn't know how to conduct a war, and a lot of kids didn't come home as a result.
Yeah, a lot of the guys, we'd fly up there and they'd have bombing halts. And I'd spend a lot of time trying to find the hidden trucks in all the truck parks during the day. And then that individual in the White House to say, well, we're going to have a bombing halt. And they'd all come out and they'd line up. There'd be hundreds of trucks lined up. And we'd circle over there and couldn't even touch them. Over Haiphong Harbor, the shipping in Haiphong Harbor, the majority of them were British registered ships in Haiphong Harbor. They were unloading SAM sites. And you're exactly right. They weren't allowed to hit them because there's a Russian down there. And then when the Russians left, then they could shoot, and then we can bomb them afterwards. I had an one of your colleagues down. His name was Scotch 03. Shot down in the jungle, and we were talking to him, and we were trying to do the rescue forces, and the Jolly Greens would come up, and they couldn't cross the border. And I was really, really upset about that. And I said something kind of bad about them, not knowing the fact that they couldn't cross the border because there was some snot-nosed kid in the basement of LBJ's White House who was asleep, and nobody wanted to wake this son of a gun up to get permission for the Jollies to come in and pick up one of my fellow warriors.
General, you were shot down and captured. How did that go?
Well, not real well. I was on a SAM suppression mission that day, and we had F-100 F model wild weasels. Later on, there were Thud weasels, but at that time they were 100. So to be one F-100 weasel with the most sophisticated gear we had at the time, anyway, the sensor equipment, and 3 strike aircraft. And we'd go up there and troll for these guys and see if we get them to shoot missiles and figure out where the sites were. And that's what we were doing that day. And then one of them stuck a couple of them up my direction, and so I saw them come off the ground, and it's a pretty easy thing to just duck them, just dive into and just turn into them, and the closure rate was such that they weren't going to go off until you were passed. So I did that, and I went down and came back up to roll in. I had rocket pods on and got hit with flak on the top of the pop. It might be interesting for you to know that we were developing tactics in those days. We didn't. This was early on, and we hadn't practiced a lot of this sort of thing before the war. And we developed a technique which also became, in a certain way, which I'll try to explain, the creed, I think, of the fighter pilot of the day. We'd go in, running in low and fast, very fast. That airplane was really fast. And the leader's job was to find the target, and the wingmen were to protect these flanks. And when the leader found the target, he'd call it, and then he would turn left or right at 30 degrees or so, and we'd fall in behind in extended trail, and then he'd pop. He'd pop up to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 feet and roll in, and we would come around, the wingmen would come around in sequence. Now, coming down the chute, there are 4 things, really, that had to happen in space and time with great precision. One was dive angle. And it could be anything. We used 45 for the most part, but as long as you knew what you were going to use and set your bomb sight accordingly. And then airspeed to arrive at a predetermined altitude, at a precise airspeed, at a precise dive angle, and with an offset aim point that we determined on the basis of winds. Now, those are the things you had to do. The thing that you couldn't do if you wanted to be successful, and this, if you want to know the soul of the fighter pilot, I think it's defined right here. What you couldn't do coming down that chute was to jink, was to move around, to make yourself more difficult to hit for those shooting at us. And there were a lot of people shooting at us. And so we said, and this is what we taught, and this is what we believed, from the top of the pop to bomb release, son, your ass belongs to Uncle Sam.
When you were picked up by the North Vietnamese, where did you go? Where did they take you?
Well, they took me to stripped me and down to my shorts and had me bound up pretty tight and took me off to a little hut someplace. I have no idea where I was. I know where I was when I was shot down, but they took me someplace and put me in a hut and kept me there until dark. And then got me out and put me in a truck and a blindfold on, and we bounced around for a while, and I ended up at a place that I didn't know then, of course, but later on knew to be the old French prison called Wallow, which we called over the years the Hanoi Hilton. And then there was a welcoming committee to make sure that we were comfortable over the next few days. And when they got through with that, then they put us in a little place called, that I learned was called the Heartbreak Hotel. 7 cells in a little cell block inside the Hanoi Hilton. And the first contact I had with another American was Robbie Reisner, who was in the cell across the way, and he had been there a while, so he knew what the schedule was for the guard change and so forth. And when he had a little period of time, he could get down and whisper under this old iron door, which he did, and made contact with me, and gave me my instructions, welcoming me in a better way than the Vietnamese had. But he was a commander, and I want you to understand this. He had command leadership oozing out of his pores, and the job that he did over the years was, I just don't know how anybody could have done it any better. He managed to, by the time he was shot down, he had a pretty ragtag bunch of guys there, had any kind of organ, they'd be separated, of course, but they didn't have any real sense of organization or set of instructions on. I mean, everybody knew the code of conduct, and everybody tried to adhere to the code of conduct, but there's a point at which you can't maintain that. And so he had a set of instructions. His influence spread by word of mouth and so forth, by using the tap code, and that's what he taught me that day. He says, you got to learn this. And he told me how it worked. He said, practice it in your head. Practice it. This is vital for survival. He said, eat whatever they give you. No matter how disgusting it is, it'll keep you alive, and on and on. And he really gave me the set of instructions that were the real guideline for behavior in prison.
Jim Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, is quoted as saying that there was no way anybody could totally beat the ropes. How accurate was that for you?
It was certainly accurate for me, and it was accurate for everybody. The point is, and this is what's really important, I can break any man with a little time and not kill him. But willingness to take it again and again and again is the trick. What they want to do is they break you and make you a malleable unit then that will comply with what they want you to do. So to maintain your dignity, to maintain your self-worth, you have to be able to say, I'll do it again. You're never going to get me to that point. I'll do it again, and you'll break me, but you won't keep me broke.
How do you explain to yourself how you and all your compadres, the hundreds and hundreds of you, that you, or most of you, maintained yourselves, maintained what you just described, and were able to come out alive?
Well, this is a subject I don't spend much time talking about, but I'll tell you one thing, that I was at the Air Force Academy many years later and speaking with a bunch of cadets, and one of them asked me, how do you prepare for that kind of an experience? And I don't know why I said this exactly. I said it without thinking, but I said the best way is to have a good mother. I think I'm not sure everybody tell you that, but I think there's something about American character, and you get it at home. and the kind of guys that we were, that kind of slice of life in our country, were the kind of guys that had that kind of character. I think there's another aspect, and it was an even better part of it, and I think Dick would probably agree. There's something about the solo mentality of the fighter pilot that I do this all by myself. I don't do things by committee. And it's up to me. What happens in here is up to me. It matters to me. I matter to it. And that's, I think, helpful in getting through a difficult experience. Self-worth, self-responsibility. And that's a characteristic that you find, and I'm sure it's the same. I haven't flown with any of those kids today, but I'm sure it's the same today. Kids flying F-22s and what have you. It's a matter of character. Starts with your mother, and it ends up in the acculturation process of the fighter pilot.
Dick?
Yeah, it's the character. And real quick little statement. It's a character of who we are. They say, well, he's a hero. Look how brave he is. And that's not the case at all. It's a normal, typical, freedom-loving person who rises to the occasion when they're faced with that. You think, well, I could never be a hero. And I say, BS, you could be a hero. If that situation came up, it would. And in fact, the time that America was attacked since Pearl Harbor, the worst attack on 9/11. Now we have multi-billion-dollar carrier groups and Air Force fighter wings with all kinds of technology, and Marines and Army divisions and stuff, all that to protect us on that day. And if you think about this hero thing, he said that 25% of that attacking force on that day was not taken out by any of these multi-billion-dollar military things. They were taken out by a handful of people on their way to vacation in California. And that epitomizes the whole thing about the character of who we are and the fact that we revere that flag. And on the Vietnam thing, there was something happen. Of course, I was almost there many times, but I tell you what, there was nobody more interested to see these guys, these heroes of mine, get off the airplane there at Clark in 1973. Is that right? Okay. When they got off, and there was one particular individual that walked off the airplane, and the gentleman is not with us any longer, but his name is Jeremiah Denton. Maybe you heard it, and I think that all of you may have heard that word. And he was on the C-141 at Freedom for the first time, and he stepped down those stairs, and all the people there that would to greet him. And what he said was so profound that I can't even say it without crying, because it epitomizes what these individuals did to return with honor, and to think about what they had gone through all those years. And Jeremiah Denton walked up to the microphone and he said, I consider it an honor to have had the privilege of serving my country under difficult circumstances. And I just can't imagine how lucky we are to have people like that considers that a privilege to be able to go through something like that. God bless you and your comments.
Jerry's speech is the best speech I ever heard.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Chuck Boyd and Dick Rutan.
I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time. Top Gun was really a thrill. I must have done well in actual combat because at the time I was just a lieutenant junior grade, which is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. And so I may have been the very first lieutenant junior grade to go through Top Gun. That was the dream of a lifetime come true. I had wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot just like my dad from the time I was 10 years old. STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die. To be an airline pilot, there was mandatory age 60 retirement. I was a NASA astronaut until I was 50 years old. And so I looked at the situation, and I had known a number of Southwest airline pilots. And they were just like me. They were flying because they loved to fly. Well, there's a lot of piloting that goes into it, a tremendous amount of piloting that goes into it, because you're going to wind up passing other airplanes. You're going to get in a duel with another airplane that's fairly closely matched. So there's a ton of satisfaction from doing that. And hey, let's just talk about the racing itself. It's fun to fly low, but it's dangerous.
We were made for grass, made to feel the joy of each and every blade, between our toes, across our backs, to run over its hills, marvel at its beauty, and find comfort in its stillness. We were made for grass. It's where we battled and celebrated, built monuments, grew families, forged memories, and pushed ourselves farther than ever before. We were made for grass, to care for, nurture, and cultivate. We've always made sure to have a patch of our own, because there's no greater feeling than being on the grass. Except
I'd like to ask you all to remain in your positions and wait to move until people tell you you can. Just want to let you know this is streaming live to 120 countries right now on UFly TV with the letter U, Fly TV. Check us out when you're not here. But here you go. Thank you.
Sandy 3 and 4, come in and hose them down one more time. Take me just north of the down pilot.
Roger, Sandy 1. We've got the down pilot in sight. We're coming in from your 6 o'clock at this time.
And we've got quite a bit of ground fire out here, so until we exactly pinpoint them, we're going to have to... Okay, Don, I think we can go for it. This is just small arms. We can move him in along the ridge line. Okay, babes, let me know I'm coming in.
Hello, gunfighter 82 Alpha. 82 Alpha, Sandy 1.
7-4, believe it's in.
Okay, Bravo, Bravo. Pop your smoke, pop your smoke. Okay, Charlie, 10 degrees more right, 10 degrees more right. Smoke straight ahead, smoke straight ahead.
Charlie 5-6, Sandy 1, go.
Right, Sandy, they want you to pull back to the west. They got some bigs coming in the area.
Roger, copy that.
Get out on the deck. I advise all choppers, get on the deck. Watch those bigs. Watch for shoots. There's the big. There's no shoot. He's done. Get down. Big, big. Charlie Green 7, watch big hit. 5, get down, choppers. Big, big. That was a big with the rocket. 7-2 is here. And past B got 7-0. Wiped him out.
Well, I'm sitting right on top down here.
The rocket went past to my right and hit 7-0. He is a ball of flame. There couldn't have possibly been any survivors out of that one.
Charlie 30, I'm over position now. Over position now, breaking right. Okay, Charlie, 10 degrees more right, 10 degrees more right. Smoke straight ahead, smoke straight ahead. Hello, Charlie 30, this is Sandy 1 on Victor. Let's get out the uniform. Okay, we got him up, coming up. I got him up, lead, coming up.
Let's get the out of here.
The Sky Raider is a brute, a hulk, big, a bulky body, long, wide, straight wings, and just one powerful engine, the same engine used on the B-29 bomber. That big engine allowed the plane to carry freakish weapons loads, more than the World War II B-17 bomber and 4 times the ordnance on the P-51 Mustang. Not all missions lasted this long, but the A-1 could stay aloft for as long as 10 hours, and thanks to those long, wide wings, could maneuver at low speeds. To protect the pilots, extra steel plating was added to the cockpit area. The Skyraider was nicknamed the Spad after the French World War I fighter that was flown by many American pilots. Eddie Rickenbacker became an ace and Medal of Honor recipient flying the Spad over France and Germany. The Skyraider first established itself in combat in 1950 in the Korean War, attacking rail yards, factories, and protecting troops on the ground. Even with great pilots flying a great airplane, there are always losses, men and planes. In Korea, 128 A-1s and many crews were lost. Next came Vietnam. The Navy Spads flew in the very first attack on North Vietnam, August 5th, 1964, from aircraft carriers in the Tonkin Gulf. The targets were fuel depots at Vinh. The Air Force also flew the Spad in various roles in Vietnam. They hunted truck convoys on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They flew close air support and dramatic life-saving Sandy missions, they were called, flying cover for rescues of threatened and injured troops on the ground. Again, there were losses in Vietnam. 266 A-1 Spads and 144 pilots were lost. The Navy's last Vietnam missions were in 1968. The Air Force continued to fly the Spad until the war ended. The Skyraiders retired now. Some say it was the most effective ground support aircraft ever. 3 remarkable American aviators join us today. 15 years ago, Paul Wood founded the Warbird Heritage Foundation. He has 5,000 hours in the cockpit, including 1,000 hours in military-type jets. He flies the F-86 in air shows. John Goldenbaum, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, retired, 20 years active duty, including 2 tours in Vietnam. 608 combat hours, highly decorated, with a Distinguished Flying Cross, 11 Air Medals, and more. He commanded the famous 71st Tactical Air Wing at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And as a civilian, flew with Delta for many years and uses aviation to work with at-risk young people. He flew the A-1, the T-38, the F-111, the F-5, and the F-15. Dick Rutan, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, retired, 20 years active duty, soloed at 16, 325 missions in Vietnam. He is a founding member of the Misties, flying the F-100 as a forward air controller. He was shot down and rescued, highly decorated with 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Star, 16 Air Medals, and the Purple Heart. He and Jeannie Yeager set the world record flying brother Burt Rutan-designed Voyager non-stop, unrefueled, around the world. 3 days and nights in a flying phone booth. Dick holds many other civilian speed and distance records.
84. Oh, he's got 3 knots and he's got 4,000 feet to go. 87. Still 10 There the wings come. She's gonna go. She's gonna go. Holy cow, look at that. Come on, Dick. Get it up. Woo-hoo! God, I thought I wasn't gonna do it, Mike. I don't believe it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome our AD Skyraider gang. On your far right is Paul Wood. Next to him is John Goldenbaum and Dick Rutan sitting right here. So afternoon, everybody. Yes. Tell us about that airplane.
So this is I think it's the first and oldest A1 Skyraider in existence today. It was built in 1947, so it's a very early model. The paint scheme on it is a more recent version of it, and when we bought the airplane, we decided to try and convert it to commemorate the Sandys that flew out of Pleiku, Vietnam. So this is from the 6th Special Operations Squadron out of Pleiku. We actually found a photograph of this airplane in a revetment, and if you look at this airplane right now, it's loaded out exactly the way the airplane was when we found it in the photograph in that revetment back in Vietnam. So we tried to make it as authentic as we could, even though it's an early version. It's not an A1H or whatever.
So can you go back and really track the missions that were flown by these airplanes?
You know, we can't track the missions themselves, but we were able by serial number to go back and look at where the airplane was actually stationed.
Right.
And so we have a whole long list. It's on our website, and I can read it off a little bit, but all the various stations that it was in. It was actually spent some time on the USS Valley Forge in the early 50s, so we think it might have actually seen some action in Korea, but we're not sure.
Right. Now, this other airplane is owned by the Kavanaugh Museum. Ken Holston is sitting over here in front, and Ken, you fly this airplane, yes?
Yes, so the Skyraiders are actually quite rare. Over 3,000 built. There's probably less than 20 flying in the world, and Kavanaugh is blessed to be the custodian of 2 Skyraiders. I currently fly the E model, which you can see out on Warbird Row right now, and then we have this H model here as well.
Now, tell us a little about the Youngblood story, because we're going to tell that whole story next year here at Warbirds, but give us an idea what that's about, would you
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about coming to AirVenture is the anticipation of a year's worth of what neat and unique thing am I going to see next. So I would ask everybody to kind of pencil into your calendar to come back and look at the Warbird in review next year. With us will be pilot Roger Youngblood. To make a long story very short, as a little teaser, our airplane, after flying with 2 different U.S. Air Force squadrons in combat, then being transferred to the South Vietnamese Air Force, was used as an escape vehicle, if you will, for a pilot seeking asylum in Thailand when the South fell to the North Communists in 1975. The State Department in Thailand at the time was afraid that airplanes like this might be claimed by the North Vietnamese and taken back and used offensively, and there was a move to hide airplanes or get them out of view, and 4 Skyraiders were hidden in northern Thailand. Roger Youngblood had flown a tour with the folks at NKP and was ordered to take 4 Skyraiders and hide them. This is one of those airplanes, and that's the reason it survives today.
Ken, thank you. And again, next year at Warbirds, we'll be telling that whole story with Roger in presence as well. So, John, how many hours do you have in the Skyraider?
Oh,
Ish.
450 roughly. How much do you like this airplane?
Well, I like it a lot.
Why?
Very reliable, very sturdy, easy to fly, carries a massive amount of ordnance. I guess reliability was everything. It was a really, really good steed and a great airplane to fly in combat. Very nice.
Just to look at this as a non-pilot, it looks like you wouldn't be able to see the runway when you're taking off. How accurate's that?
You know, it's a really easy airplane to see the runway. Most tail draggers are a lot worse than this. I mean, the visibility over the nose is pretty good. You don't even need to S-turn it. You sit pretty high on the airplane. Good visibility. It's kind of funny. You know, when I went through Air Force pilot training in the late 60s, of course, there were no tailwheel airplanes at all. We flew nose-wheel airplanes, first the T-37, then the T-38. And if you went to a Skyraider school, well, you just got in the damn thing, you know, so that's basically what it was. Nobody told us it was hard to fly a tailwheel airplane. I'm amazed now at this stage in life where everybody gets excited about, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a tailwheel endorsement. We thought it was just another airplane.
Wow. Dick, you did not fly this airplane, right?
No, I didn't. No, I did not fly the Skyraider in Vietnam. However, I worked a lot of them in our mission over North Vietnam.
So explain that, would you, Dick? That's the Misty mission, right?
Right, yeah. The Misty FAC mission is when we had a solo Misty that spent from dawn till noon all by yourself. And we'd find targets and then direct strikes in on them. And these Skyraiders, boy, I tell you, that was really something. My experience running with these guys and what they could do was just phenomenal. And to fly that slow, see, in combat, you find out what is enough speed when you're going after a target. What's enough speed? And my idea of that is that you come in at the speed of light. And then you destroy the bastards, and then you leave before they even see you coming. Now, that's enough speed. But the 100, we drilled around at 400 and 500 knots, but these guys, their mission time or their on-target time was, what was that?
6 hours? Or?
No, I mean the speeds.
Probably 160-ish.
Yeah,
knots,
on a good day, 160, 170.
Yeah.
So how much more dangerous was what you were doing than what you were doing?
Well, it's hard for me to. Everything he did was dangerous, and I guess everything I did was dangerous. It's hard to think about things that weren't particularly dangerous. But we never thought about that when we were doing it, quite frankly.
So describe your missions, John. Tell us about what you would do, where you do it, how you do it.
Well, understand that, again, the Air Force had probably somewhere around 250 Skyraiders, and the reason why they quit flying Skyraiders at the end, just a little bit after my tour of duty in the Skyraider, is because we ran out of them. You know, I mean, that essentially was what happened. So by the time I really got combat ready and showed up in the Skyraider, I think there was one squadron left, which was the one I was in, and Roger Youngblood in the first SOS, First Special Operations Squadron at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. And we had no more than 30 airplanes at that time. That was the entire fleet of airplanes. So the importance of using them for the search and rescue mission, as you saw in the film clip, was paramount. So we essentially, that was all we wound up doing, is we would wait for somebody to get shot down, then we would escort Jolly Green Giants in to try to pick them up, like Dick, and so that was our main mission. We did have some other missions we would do, but they absolutely took a back seat to having the airplanes available for search and rescue missions.
What kind of altitudes did you fly, and how available were you to ground fire and all that kind of thing?
Oh, we really flew high, sometimes as high as 400 or 500 feet. You know? So, no, we would, the airplane was heavily loaded, as you can imagine. I mean, we took off at full gross weight, and we would kind of limp along and fly, go into the target area at maybe 200 knots. We got to the target area, almost everything we did was in a circular pattern. And there are two ways to get shot at. One is to get right in the sweet spot where the guns can track you and do your thing. The other thing is to get low enough so they have trouble depressing the gun and following you. And literally, when we were doing a SAR or anything that was close air support, we stayed pretty close to the treetops. And for that reason, there wasn't a lot of tip in and dive angle. Just about everything we did and all the ordnance you can see loaded up here except for the daisy cutters up there. Basically, we're done for level delivery, and that's the way we did it. We didn't use our gun sights very much. We drug off CBU with our left ankle, We strafed by pointing the nose of the airplane exactly at it, and our whole thing was low slant range, get in there. Everything we learned about high angle dive and all that stuff that we went through when we were going through gunnery school is absolutely worthless. So, we were low and slow, and that's what we did.
And you would call in the Jolly Greens?
What would happen is when someone would get shot down, we would sit alert, 4 Sky Raiders, 2 Jolly Green Giants. We'd start every day by putting these airplanes on alert very early in the morning. And then we'd wait for somebody to get shot down, like Dick, So when they got shot down, we would launch, we'd scramble, and we'd go out. First, you try to find the guy. You try to make sure you know where he is. Sometimes it worked well, sometimes it didn't work so well. And then what we would do is we would soften up the area. The Sky Raiders would come in first, and we'd usually set up something that's tantamount to a daisy chain, we call it, where we just put down this ring of death around the guy. And when we thought we had suppressed enough ground fire, the guys coming in, then we would call in the Jolly Green Giant, who was standing off by 5 or 6 clicks somewhere where he wasn't getting shot at. And Sandy Low Lead, the Sandy leader, would lead the Sky Raider directly in. If it was Dick on the ground, we'd be talking to him. We'd say, pop your smoke. At that time, he had a smoke flare that he would pop. The Jolly Green could see the smoke coming out of the jungle or wherever it was, go into a hover, put a jungle penetrator down. The guy would get on it and pull him up. In the meantime, we would
What's a jungle penetrator?
Is at the end of a long cable. It was a folding seat torpedo is what it looks like, so it would go through tall trees. Once through the trees, the guy on the ground could fold a seat down and strap himself in, and you'd pull him up through the treetops. So we call that a jungle penetrator. Wow. And again, while that pickup was going on, then we just continue with death and destruction as far as we could, and we could carry a lot of ordnance. And we'd do that until hopefully the guy was picked up and could go back home. Then we'd drink beer.
How concerned with trying to destroy all the bad guys around that you'd also hit the guy you're trying to pick up?
In my knowledge, we never hit the guy. I mean, I don't know, and if he did, he didn't complain, so... I mean, we lost a lot of guys. There are a lot of guys we didn't get out of the jungle, so you never know. And some of the ordnance, the long silver tubes up there, CBU-25, are little bomblets that roll out of the back there, anti-personnel things, work extremely well, and they put down a long string of bomblets that take out personnel, essentially. Then we used a lot of strafe, whole lot of rockets. There are no rocket pods on this thing. But as far as I know, we never had a guy complain who said that we hit him. As a matter of fact, if you were in that position on the ground, you just kept squealing for us to get closer and closer and closer.
Right. Dick,
go. Yeah, if you think about it, my philosophy has come in at the speed of light. Okay, well, my jet fighter would drill around at 400 or 500 knots, and then these guys would come in at lower speed. But the guys that really hung it out, the Jolly Greens, and they came in a hover. Right on the deck. And I've been on a lot of rest caps for these. Usually I'm probably working the airplane that got shot down. So I was there, I saw him get shot down, we could identify where he was. And then up, and the old thing was you start screaming for Jolly Green on the ground. And once you make contact, there's another thing, it's authenticate the pilot that's on the ground, authentication. And when you get into Vietnam, there's a little card you fill out. It has 4 numbers, and it has 2 or 3 questions. And they said, when you fill this out, you better remember those numbers or the answer to those questions. Because when you need them, you're going to be in an extremely high-stress area. So before you fill this out, now you fill that card out, and nobody sees it. They fold it, they put it in an envelope, and they seal it, and they put it in a safe. And generally, it was my job, or the Misty's job, because we were more or less right there on the scene initially, is that before they can launch these guys with huevos about yay big in to pick them up, we have to interrogate them. So when the pilot gets shot down, they open the safe and they call that number back and they ask him a question. And it was up to me to read to know what the question was. Now, I didn't know what the answer was, but we would relay the question to the survivor on the ground. and then he would say the answer, and then I'd make sure that I understood him as best I could. Take a deep breath, cross your fingers, because if I didn't say the right word, they were going to leave him. And there was an area of a lot of stress. And there was one guy down, and he says, the question was, say college roommate's name. That's a simple thing. Could be Frank or Jake or something pretty easy. And he come back with this. The survival radios are kind of scratchy and kind of hard to understand to start with. And he says, Kabui. I thought, Kabui? That's not a name. And the pressure built because if I didn't get this right, we were going to leave him. And so I asked him a couple more times, and it always came back Kabui. And I thought, well, I'm going to do the best I can to mimic exactly what I heard from the survival radio back to search and rescue headquarters. And he came back and took a deep breath and crossed my fingers, and he says, answer to college roommate name, Kabui. And he says, that's him, go get him. Oh, God, thank God for that.
Hey, Dick, describe your Misty missions. How many did you fly? Over 300 something?
Yeah, the Misty was an experimental thing. They started in 1967 by Colonel Bud Day. And he was shot down right away and captured and spent the early Vietnam captors. And you think about the courage of this man and how tough he was, that he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his conduct as a prisoner of war. That is really something extraordinary. And he was our boss. His name was Bud Day. And he was our boss. And he got shot down right away. In our little group, there'd always be another commander. But every time the new commander would come in, all us Misties would get around and say, look, this is, I know what your designation is, but you got to know one thing, that our boss is in the Hanoi Hilton. And what we do, is in honor of him. And so all the bosses that cycled through us, they knew that it was just an interloper at best. And when the war was over, we waited for Bud to come home, and then our little group, a small group, there's only about 154 of us through the whole war. And we had practice reunions, and then we had the reunion. Practice reunions.
How do you practice for a reunion?
Well, we couldn't have a real reunion, a Misty reunion, until our boss got out of jail.
Right.
And so when Bud Day got out, we had one hell of a party. But our mission is that there was a lot of problems in North Vietnam about, first of all, identifying the target, or even if they had a target, to find it. For the people, the fighter bombers that come in high altitude, they were new there. They're looking around, and everything's really strange. And they had a hard time locating it, and so the bomb damage effectiveness was really very poor. And so they decided that if we could put somebody up there at low altitude and keep them there as a forward air control, and the area like the back of your hand, we knew every gun site. They even give all the gunners different names, pet names. And if they were really good, then we went back and called a Sky Raider to come and kill them. Or if they were not so good, then we'd take care of them. We'd deliver their mail and put box lunches out for them and make sure that they were alive and well. But if they were really good, they had to die. So we took them out of the gene pool. And we'd orbit around, and we'd find targets, and usually they were frag missions. We would have 4 or 5 flights of F-4s or F-105 that were assigned to us, and then we'd go up and find them a good target, and then we'd direct it. We'd brief them on the target, and then we'd roll in and put a smoke rocket on it, and then the old word was, hit my smoke. And then stand back and watch them. And we were putting in a flight of Sky Raiders one day, low and slow, up by the Quang Key River Valley. And this Sky Raider rolled in, and there was a couple of 37 millimeter that were really accurate, and they were firing like mad. And it looked like a solid stream of tracers coming up. And here this little A4 was coming in at the speed of nothing, like he could have landed on the tracers. He was coming by. And then he pulls off and he says, whoops, I've been hit. Now, when you get hit at a jet fighter, everybody says, oh, God, he's been hit. Oh, God, we got to join up. How bad is it? We'll abandon the target and stuff. And we thought it was kind of the same thing when he called off and says, hey, I've been hit. And then the next thing he said was, okay, Misty, where do you want this other bomb? I said, you got to be kidding me. Guys that run around that low, even if they get hit, They're ready to go to war. And I was never so proud of a bunch of guys that did that, and I was totally in awe of what they did.
So describe your shoot down. What happened?
The loss rate in the Misties were 28% loss rate. And so they only required us to fly 120 days. You're totally a volunteer, and if you wanted to go and hang it out really bad in North Vietnam, where the action was, then they only asked you to go, and you could fly about maybe 55 missions, 55, maybe 60 missions in your 120-day tour. And then if you survive that, then you go back to South Vietnam, and then you could drop bombs in a jungle and make toothpicks and make monkeys deaf. But I flew my first tour, and I turned around and looked at making monkeys deaf compared to going up there and knocking out gun sites and major transshipment points and barges and ammo caches that would explode and burn for days. And I thought, you know something, I didn't come here. I came just like a whole bunch of young guys. They came to Vietnam to win the goddamn thing and then go home. And unfortunately, our commanders had a different idea about that. Then it was really, really frustrating for a lot of guys that flew combat up there. Anyway, I'd done a second tour and got hit a few times, not fatal, but that was this part of the course. But one day we were down strafing a damn truck because actually three F-100s come up to hit this truck, and they were patch wearers. You know, the guys that graduated from fighter weapons school, patch wearers. And these guys are really good, and they're going to take this truck out. Well, all three of them rolled in, and they all missed the truck, as bad as the F-4 Phantoms did. And so this was a test. And that damn truck was sitting down there laughing at us. And so I was on a champagne flight for my buddy who was finishing his first tour. I had 105, and he had about 60. And I was just going along with him for a ride to celebrate because we were high school buddies. Thought that would be cool. So anyway, that damn truck was there, and nobody could hit it. And so we went around and we did a thing like these guys do all the time, low-angle strafe. Big mistake. Anyway, he's down in the weeds, a low-angle strafe, opened fire, blew the hell out of the truck, pulled up, bang. Hit right in the bottom fuselage, and we're burning like mad. And we burned all the way to the Gulf of Tonkin. And just about ran out of fuel because it was gushing fuel out. And so I sat there watching the fuel gauge unwind and watching the coast come up. And initially, we thought, fuel gauge unwind, coast coming up, no fine way we're going to make it. And so we decided that maybe we'll light the afterburner and maybe use the fuel to accelerate instead of dumping it overboard. And he says, well, what if all the fuel is now inside the fuselage? But then I looked down at the coastal plain and all the farmers down there that are really mad at us generally. And then it was an easy decision. So you kind of hunch over and tense up a little bit and select afterburner. And it didn't blow up. Anyway, we flamed out just short of the coast, going like stink. And we just kind of did a parabolic curve off the coast of North Vietnam and ejected. And on the way out, I had more time up there than anybody else in country. Our in-country time. And like I said, the sorties were 6 hours long, and we'd refuel back and forth. And I thought, you know, on the way out, we're burning, and for the first time I thought, if I can get to the coast, I'm going to eject, and I ain't coming up here anymore. I'm done. I've done more. Nobody will ever criticize Dick for saying, hey, I quit. And then the first time I thought, you know, I may make it. I may actually survive this damn thing. And then I said, all I got to do is eject in the parachute, go in a raft, and get picked up with a Jolly Green, and I'm going home. And I only had a handful of days left in country anyway. And so anyway, the guy says, well, how violent is it to eject out of a rocket? You know, as a rocket seat blows you out of the airplane, you'd think that'd be very violent. Well, let me tell you something. If you know what's going to happen to that jet in just a handful of time, you don't want to be anywhere near it. And that ride up and out is the most beautiful, smoothest experience you'll ever have.
So how long before you were picked up?
Well, we floated around off the Gulf of Tonkin, and it was a beautiful day. There was no wind. The Gulf of Tonkin water was warm, and I could see maybe 30 feet down. And it was a very pleasurable experience, although I kept looking over my shoulder to see if they'd launch any boats out to come and get me. But they said it was an F-100, and so they went south. And by the time they says, no, it's an F-100 up north. He says, well, F-100s don't fly up north. Well, yeah, they do. Anyway, he turned the Jolly around and went back up. And so I had a good time to relish the thought that I got out of this war and I got out alive.
John, as you're listening to all of this, how fulfilling was it for you and your compadres to do the work we were doing just so people like Dick could get picked up?
Well, I think it goes without saying how fulfilling it was. I mean, there were many frustrating missions in Vietnam, and if your primary mission was to go out and rescue a fellow airman from capture or death, it's pretty fulfilling when you get them. I do want to say, though, that although at my stage of the war, we were predominantly being used in the Sandy mission for search and rescue, and I hope I've got some fellow Skyraider pilots that are in the audience today.
Let's look and see. Are there any Skyraider pilots here today? There's one right there.
Well, prior to me, because I was at the very end, the A-1 was used in a number of just legendary missions, and my hat is really off to the Zorros and the guy that flew the night mission, night interdiction on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where they're doing high-angle dive and putting down CBU and the whole thing like the Nimrod A-26s did in the night truck hunting role. That was not a fun run. That was not a good thing. And we also did many other things, Prairie Fire, DOZ, other special missions, a lot of it tied in with clandestine operations all over Laos and up into North Vietnam. And again, by the time I got there, we had so few Sky Raiders that the majority of them were held back and used for the Sandy mission. But without a doubt, one of the proudest things that I can ever say was that I was a Sandy low lead or a Sandy 1, particularly as a first lieutenant. That was it's quite an honor for me to have the ability to do that.
When you use the word frustration missions or having frustration certain missions, what kind?
Well, without getting political, because we're not here to do that, but just as Dick said, the war was not controlled primarily by the military. It was controlled by politicians. And so most of our target selection, most of the things that we did, I can only say was asinine. You know, you agree with me, Dick? I mean, it was it was pretty bad. And so to see the kind of sacrifices that fellow airmen did against targets that we all knew were dead, worthless, or not doing that was pretty frustrating. That's where the frustration came in. So being a Sandy, there was no frustration factor whatsoever, except if you didn't get the guy.
Yeah. Paul, what is it like for you to sit here and listen to all this firsthand stuff from guys of this quality?
Well, it's a very rare opportunity for me to be next to these folks with their great histories and the contributions that they made to our country. And I think what it does for me is it just makes me all the more motivated to maintain and take great care of these airplanes so that we can show them to people and then honor the people that flew them and made the sacrifices for our country. So I get very psyched up and very motivated to continue what we do at Warbird Heritage Foundation to maintain these airplanes.
You know, and here at Warbirds, we're determined to share this history to the extent we can, especially for young people. We're not teaching it in schools anymore, and we have minimal opportunity here, but wonderful opportunities to try to acquaint adults and especially young people about how many have given so much so that we could be sitting here today in a free country. That's what our mission is. John, I know you have Dick. Go.
No, okay, well, we talk about frustration, and to try to give you some feeling about frustration, you know, it's one thing that they don't give you the right targets and the ordnance and so forth. That's one thing, and we can deal with that. But what we really had a hard time dealing with is when one of our own was down on the ground, and then the ineffective and the political stuff about trying to rescue him. You talk about being frustrated. I found an F-105 pilot. His name was Scotch 03. His name was Medica. And he was shot down in the afternoon of one day, and then I'd flown 7.5 hours on that mission, about the whole thing. But anyway, I located him by just a chance to see his parachute go through the jungle. And I memorized the spot and came around and we could talk to him very, very briefly. But he says, I'm down, I got a broken back, and I can't move, and I want to get out of here. And that's one of our own. He's down there. I mean, he's a fellow fighter pilot, for crying out loud. Now, all that other stuff is just go to heck. The whole procedure is that go down and get him no matter what, and knowing that all my other colleagues would do the same thing if I was down there on the ground. Anyway, it was so late we couldn't generate a rescue mission that night. And so I came by him and I said, put him to bed, and I said, you hide, and I'll be here at first light to pick you up. And so we went back and tried to coordinate the mission, and just at dawn, I came with the F-100 right over him, lit the burner. I can't imagine he would be asleep, could you? No. And pulled up and came around, and he says, you still there? He says, you're not captured. Obviously, he's talking on the radio. But we had a kind of a rule, an agreement with our government that if in Vietnam, that if you were down and you were not captured and you were talking on your radio, we would spare nothing to get you out, period. They would even dig a trench and sail to Missouri up there to get you. That's our understanding of this. We'll go and do this, but if we're not captured and we have a radio. Now, most of us that flew, we had 2 radios, and in my G-suit pocket, I had a bunch of batteries. And that if I went in the water, I'd probably still be going down. But I was going to have that radio to talk to somebody. And so the next morning, it was a jumble of messed up. They tried to go in, and they shot 2 Jolly Greens down, and they were shot up so bad that they limped back to the rock pile across the DMZ, and they never flew again. And there was one Sandy. The Sandy pilot was working this thing to tell you that he got shot up so bad, he went over, and I don't know why he didn't eject, but he did a dead stick landing in the Ben Hai River, and he did not survive. So we got 2 helicopters shot up, and we got an A-1 that shot down. And I'm trying to work this rescue and do what I can and coordinate with the Sandys and get the F-105s stacked up to have, when the Jolly comes in, we can put ordnance all around to protect him. But what they did find him that night, and he said they found him. And they backed off and they set up a flak trap. And the first 2 Jollies came in. As soon as they hovered, they shot him to pieces. But they limped away. 2 of them, same thing happened. Only this time, this was at noon, and I was just done with my cycle. I was briefing my replacement, Wells Jackson, and all of a sudden there's a radio call. I mean, there's the Sandys and the Jollies are holding off, and guys stacked up in flights, and the word comes from Crown headquarters, and they say, abandon the rescue and pull the forces out. Abandon. It was incomprehensible. And I think everybody that was airborne that day working that rescue felt the same way. Abandon and pull the forces out. Who in the hell is this guy? What kind of coward leadership do we have? What I found out was that the Jollies couldn't come across the border without waking up some snot-nosed kid in LBJ's basement. And nobody wanted to wake him up because the prick was asleep. Well, we had a guy down with a broken back, one of our fellow comrades, trying to get the rescue forces to get approval for some kid in LBJ's White House. Now, that's frustration. Now, when they said pull the forces out, there was no darn way that I was going to accept that. Little Dickie Rutan had a captain, and I says, who in the hell made that decision? He said, well, there's a colonel, or maybe it was a general down in Saigon. And I says, who in the hell is that general that made that decision? And they come back, and everybody was there. He said, okay, we're going to relay that. We want to know the answer, too. And then when that was going back and forth and we were arguing about pulling them out, something else dawned on me. The fact is, I was the only guy that could talk to Medica on the ground. And it was going to be up to me to tell him that we abandoned you to die. And I thought, there's no fine way, baby. You made the decision. I want you to say the words. And so I called back. Here's some arrogant little fighter pilot, captain, demanding from this general officer, coward. I says, I want to know the exact words that I'm supposed to tell him that you're abandoning him to die. I want to know the exact words. And then everybody else picked up on that too. Yeah, we want to know the exact words too. And I got relieved by Wells Jackson while we were waiting. We couldn't really believe that this was actually happening, that we were going to abandon somebody that was still not captured and talking on the radio. And I left. Climbed out after 15 hours flying time. I went back to Phuket and landed. I was sitting at the bar, surrounded by beer bottles, really dejected that my government had done such a thing, and evaluate whether I wanted to even go up there anymore, if that's what kind of leadership we were going to have in this outfit. And Wells, just before dawn, just before night, Wells Jackson walks in the door, and he had a big smile on his face. And I looked at Wells and I says, "What the hell are you smiling about?" And he says, "Dick, they got him out."
Oh, man.
And I says, "What? They got him out?" He says, "Yeah, the general couldn't come up with the right words." And one of the most incredible things happened.
Holy.
One of the most incredible thing happened. The guy was Captain Ingen, and he was a Jolly Green. He was a Coast Guard flying the Air Force, kind of an exchange guy. And he came in, and the Sandies beat it up as much as they could. He came in and hovered, and he dropped down on the ground. A guy by the name of Sergeant. God, sorry. This guy should have gotten the Medal of Honor. I'll think of it in a minute. They dropped him down on the ground and let him go, and he walked around and found Medica, and he vectored the Jolly Green over. Not a one round of ground fire. Everything was really cool. Now, these guys on the ground, they were really smart because the guy came into hover, they shot him, and he got away. But they knew that if he put the cable down and the penetrator down to pick him up, that guy was anchored and he couldn't leave. And so they all waited. His name was Joel Talley, Sergeant Talley. And he had been in country 2 days. This is his second day in country. And he's down there, he finds Medica. The helicopter comes over, they put down the penetrator down through the jungle, and they strap him on, and he straps himself on, still quiet. He's stepping up there in a beautiful hover, through a couple 100 feet of jungle canopy, and then he squeezes the mic button. Now, I got this all recorded. Wells Jackson recorded the whole thing. He squeezed the mic button. He says, "Okay, I got him. Pull me up." In a handful of seconds, Talley grabbed the mic button again, and he squeezed it, and he starts screaming. He says, "Ground fire, ground fire, ground fire, take it out, cut me loose, take it out." Now, he's hanging on a rope, coming up through the jungle, and in the background's an intense automatic weapons fire as he's hanging there. Now, Ingen, he stayed there in a hover, and they shot the crap out of him, and they shot it up so bad, there was hydraulic fluid, there was fuel lines punctured, and fuel was coming down, his plexiglass coming off the airplane, falling down around him, and here this kid is hanging on the rope, saying, cut me loose, take it out, take it out." And Ingen sat there in a perfect hover, just like he's on a Sunday afternoon boat cruise, with his thumb on it, and he came all the way through that couple 100 foot of Jolly, and he translated out, all shot up, and made it across the rock pile, and the guy was rescued. And I thought, wow. Now, those are the people, those are the warriors with the courage, those guys. And it had nothing to do with the Vietnam leadership, which is really sad.
John, do you have any of these similar experiences with guys? With the leadership problems?
Well, I think we've probably discussed it enough. That was history. I will say this: I always like to go forward and be more positive. And after that period of time in my life, that was my introduction, of course, to the Air Force and being in the military. But I was proud to say that in latter years, when I served 20 years as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and leadership just got better and better and better and better. And our presidential leadership got better. Everything got better. And by the time that I retired as an Air Force officer, I think we fixed the problem. So for that reason, I look back on it as a dark era that got fixed, essentially.
Lessons learned?
Lessons learned are don't vote for anybody, first of all. Okay, don't go electing politicians. Whatever you do, that's a bad thing. No, lessons learned. I'm very positive about the future of the country, and I do think I have to underscore a couple of things that Dick said. There is no finer fighting force in the world than the men and women of the United States military, and to serve with them was a great honor.
John, you have a particular passion about young people. Tell us about that.
Well, and I've got some of my colleagues in the audience, so Greg and Beth and John, stand up, please. Stand up. Kevin, are you here? McFrenzy's not here? Okay. Thank you. Well, we're from Flaybob Airport in Riverside, California, and short story long. Some years ago, through our great benefactor, Tom Wathen, who endowed Flaybob Airport, and gave us the mission of trying to bring young people, particularly troubled young people, into aviation. And we've been able to fairly successfully do that. So for the last 15 years, we've brought a lot of young people from out of the barrios of Southern California into being very, very successful aircraft mechanics, pilots, juvie records expunged. And what we try to do is to, again, give a second chance to the young folks that have not yet been judged correctly or had a good thing, and we've been quite successful at that. We're happy to say that at Flaybob, we have not only many, many programs for troubled youth, but we're blessed with having a high school, an aviation high school, that soon will reopen with 240 students directly on our campus. We also have a large campus of the Spartan College of Aeronautics, the Spartan A&P School. We soon are going to open a facility for 350 young people to become A&P mechanics. So we got a great passion for aviation. Again, we're very honored to do that, and it's through the help of staff from Flaybob that we do that.
Wow.
You know where EAA chapter number 1 is?
I do know where it is.
It's Flaybob. Everybody ought to be a member of their local chapter, plus join chapter number 1 at Flaybob. Now, he talked about the inspiration. And I'll tell you the inspiration, the personal experience about the inspiration. Now, it's a little airport by Mount Rubidoux, and it's by Riverside, California. And when this little kid, the mother took this little kid, he was about this high, out to Mount Rubidoux, to Flaybob Airport to give him an airplane ride. And it was just a grass field out there. And this little kid still remembers standing in the back of that J5 Cub holding on to the seat. And somebody came out and woke up the gerbil, spun the prop around. And with no tread on the tires, that airplane bounced off that morning and climbed up and flew a handful of minutes over Riverside, California. And that little kid looked out the window, and it changed his life forever. And nobody knew at that time that little kid would fly the first nonstop flight around the world. So thank you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, God. Paul?
I'm almost speechless here. This is pretty incredible.
Exactly.
It's quite an honor to just be next to these two guys. I mean, with the aviation experience around here on the deck here, it's just incredible. And it's quite a
And what John
great
says
privilege.
about the excellence of our military, here sit two of them in front of you today to talk with you about commitment, passion, and freedom. And that's what they've done. And thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sam Bass. Sam's extraordinary aviator, 35,000 hours in the cockpit. And he's going to talk with both Paul and with John about these two aircraft here and learn something more about what makes them go. So, Dick, thank you. Paul, John, Dick, thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Paul, thank you. Really appreciate you bringing your airplane here. Could you tell us a little bit about the power, the 3350, and also how much horsepower you have?
Sure. Well, it's a Wright 3350. It's 18 cylinders. So 2 rows and 9 cylinders. So it's 36 spark plugs. So our maintenance guys, when they go out there and try and fix it all and change the plugs and things, it's a big job. Max horsepower is 2,700 horsepower. So to put that a little bit in perspective, if you think about a Stearman biplane, it's about 220 horsepower. A Mustang is about 1,500 horsepower, give or take a little bit. And this is 2,700 horsepower. So it is a much, much more powerful airplane.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the armament on it.
So there's a whole series of different things here. We tried to make it exactly the way, as I said earlier, it was in Vietnam. It has 20 millimeter cannons, one on each wing here that you can see. 7.62 minigun, This is in the pod under the wing. The far outside white is a white phosphorus bomb. John mentioned earlier these silver tubes they're CBU-14 cluster bombs, so anti-personnel. And then the 250-pound bombs right next to it have a thing called daisy cutter fuses on them. And so the way that worked is the fuse on a normal bomb would detonate when it hit the ground, and that would create a scatter pattern of the shrapnel in a smaller area. And so they put an extension on the fuse there, so when it hit the ground, the fuse would hit the ground first, and the bomb would explode about 2 or 3 feet above the ground, and much more effective. And then the last one here is basically a propaganda pamphlet canister, believe it or not. So it's sort of like, going to drop the canister of pamphlets, say, just get out of the way because we're going to bomb the hell out of you. So.
Okay, now, how much fuel do you carry in this tank here? Is this a fuel tank?
Yeah, that's a fuel tank. It's 150 gallons, and I forget how much there's internal, but the key about this airplane is it had a loiter time of about 6 hours. So unrefueled with drop tanks and internal fuel, it could fly and loiter over a target for up to 6 hours, and it could still carry a full complement of armaments underneath the wing.
Okay, now this is an 81.
Correct.
This is an H. Give us just a little. We'll talk to Ken a little bit about his H, but just tell me.
Well, this is a very early version, so there's a little bit of difference in the airframe. The tail on this 81 is a little bit smaller. If you put them side by side, you could tell. The engine, original engine on the 81 was an earlier version of the 3350, and we have a more up-to-date version here, so it's not exactly historically accurate. But the engine was a little bit earlier version. The tail was a little bit different. This has a max takeoff weight of about 17,000 pounds, so it's about 11,000 pounds empty weight, and it could carry about 6,000 pounds of ordnance. The H, I think John will say, is a 22,000 pound max. I think it carries a little bit more. So there's some subtle differences. This is just an early version, and that's the much later version.
Well, I noticed there's a difference in the prop hubs here. Is there any difference in the props? Are they both the same manufacturer? Or are they Aero Products props?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, the hubs looks a little bit different. I'm not really sure, to be honest. Maybe John,
he'll know. He'll make up something.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, we appreciate you sharing this with us,
pleasure.
and it's great. Thank you very much. Right. But tell us a little bit about the H model.
The H model, ironically, late model airplane, the reason they built the late series airplanes is that the Navy and Marines essentially used up the Sky Raiders in the Korean War. Jet technology hadn't quite matured as rapidly as they'd hoped, and they didn't have good strike aircraft on the carriers as soon as they wanted. And so rather than go with anemic jet attack airplanes, they decided just to build more Sky Raiders. And it's those late model Sky Raiders that went to Vietnam and served there. Our particular airplane was built in 1955 and had an honorable history with the Navy. We know the units that it served with, but other than that, it was a pretty camera-shy airplane. We've never located a picture of it with Navy service, and we don't have much information about precisely what it did, although we know the units that it served with did fly some of those early strikes in Vietnam. So there's a very good chance that this airplane saw combat in Vietnam off the ship with the Navy, again with the Air Force, and then later with the South Vietnamese Air Force.
Okay, what kind of armor do you have on yours here?
We currently don't have any ordnance.
What's it capable of?
Well, capability, Paul kind of alluded, because this is a late model airplane, it's a little more capable, and in just round numbers, if you say it's 12.5 empty, about 25,000 pounds wartime gross, so it could carry its own weight in fuel and ordnance. The typical Sandy search and rescue or SAR load that they did in Southeast Asia was about 8,000 pounds.
So in the SAR, tell us a little bit about Fisher and his the rescue over there where he won the medal.
So if you
awarded the medal on it.
Exactly. If you're familiar with the name Bernie Fisher, it's a Sky Raider pilot that was one of two Air Force Sky Raider pilots to earn the Medal of Honor, or be awarded the Medal of Honor, I should say. A four-ship of Sky Raiders is conducting a strike in the Ashaw Valley. One of the pilots, named Jump Myers, was hit and had to make a forced landing because the early Sky Raiders did not have the Yankee extraction seat, I believe that they talked about earlier. Jump Myers bellies in. Just coincidentally, the Ashaw Valley had a strip that had been abandoned. He aimed for that, put the airplane down, ran and hid behind some cover. And when Bernie Fisher called for the rescue, for the Jollies to come in and pick him up, they said, no, it's going to be 20, 30 minutes. They won't get there in time. And he basically said, well, then I'm going to go in and land and get him. Bernie puts his gear down, makes an approach, realizes he's too fast, does a go-around, does a whifferdil, comes back in and lands. And all throughout the landing roll, he's dodging holes in the runway and 55-gallon drums and debris. And he comes to a stop by the burning airplane, and he's looking for Jump Myers. Jump runs out, climbs in the airplane. The story goes he dives in head first into the right seat because it's an E model, side by side. Bernie spins the airplane around, locks the tail wheel, throws the coals to it, and blasts off. The airplane's full of holes, but he saved a fellow airman. And that airplane, by the way, if you've been to the National Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, is on display, that very airplane, and it is the only known Medal of Honor aircraft to survive. All others were either scrapped or lost in the Medal of Honor action. So it's a very, very historic airframe.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much. We appreciate you bringing the airplane here and sharing your experience, too.
My pleasure,
Thank you.
Sam. Good to see you.
Thank you, folks.
Dick Rutan, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, retired, 20 years active duty, soloed at 16, 325 missions in Vietnam. He is a founding member of the Misties, flying the F-100 as a forward air controller. He was shot down and rescued, highly decorated with 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Star, 16 Air Medals, and the Purple Heart. He and Jeannie Yeager set the world record flying brother Burt Rutan-designed Voyager non-stop, unrefueled, around the world. 3 days and nights in a flying phone booth. Dick holds many other civilian speed and distance records.
84. Oh, he's got 3 knots and he's got 4,000 feet to go. 87. Still 10. There the wings come. She's gonna go. She's gonna go. Holy cow! Look at that. Come on, Dick. Get it up. Woo-hoo! God, I thought it wasn't gonna do it, Mike. I don't believe it.
Dick has written a wonderful autobiography. You just saw a slide about it up there a couple of minutes ago. But unfortunately, got held up at the publisher. It was supposed to be here now. It's not, but it will be here next year. So we're here to build excitement about reading Dick's book. It's really a wonderful book about his career. Hi, how are you?
Pretty good, David.
Good.
Good to see you.
Good to see
Hey,
you.
look at all these smiling people here.
Yeah.
I don't see any umbrellas.
No.
They're very courage.
Don't say it. Don't say it. But we're here today to talk about Voyager, because last year we talked about Sandy's and all of that. But this year we want to talk about Voyager. Dick, what was the goal of Voyager when you and Bert first thought about it? What was the goal?
The primary goal, and it turned out to be the major motivation that kind of sustained us for 5.5 years, is to be a milestone and be first to fly unrefueled around the world, non-stop, non-refueled. And we kind of looked at that as obviously a major milestone, but maybe the last one, arguably an atmospheric flight. And so that's that motivation. And all the trials and tribulations that we had during the 5.5 year odyssey to do this, to maintain the motivation, all I had to do was I'd go out in the Mojave Airport on the ramp and sit with my back up against the hangar all by myself. And I close my eyes and put my head back a little bit, and I try to imagine what it would feel like to land at Edwards Air Force Base having accomplished aviation's last first. And then I let that settle a little bit and let that permeate into my psyche. And I decided that would feel pretty darn good. And so whatever the problems were, I could just get up and just hammer at it again.
So how accurate is it, the thought that you and Dick, or you and Bert were sitting in a coffee shop or restaurant and he sketched it out on a napkin? Is that accurate?
No, that's accurate. In fact, most great airplanes start either in a restaurant or in a bar with a drawing on a napkin. That's kind of traditional. But Bert had been thinking about this, and he realized that we now have available the material that's going to make a transglobal flight unrefueled possible. That's carbon fiber. And he says that with carbon fiber, it is now possible for the first time to design, build an airplane capable of 29,000 statute miles unrefueled range.
Wow. How much did it go from the napkin to the realization of what he had to do in terms of design to make that happen, even though he understood carbon fiber could potentially make it happen?
Well, up until it's a good question. Up until the time we met in the restaurant, he never put pen to paper or even worked out any kind of numbers and, all the formulas those genius designers use to do airplanes. He never did any of that. And this was kind of a concept that he had in his mind. And thank goodness the Voyager ended up to be looking nothing like what he drew on the napkin that day.
Oh, really? So you said a couple of times 5.5 years. From napkin to takeoff in December of '86, it was 5.5 years?
It was, right at 5.5 years. And Bert thought it would take, in fact, he said, Dick, why don't you do this Voyager thing? And it's going to take maybe 18 months, and then you can go on with something more useful in your life. Holy bananas.
So, but what besides the design, what were the biggest challenges for you and Gina in the whole process to get to where you could actually fly the airplane?
Well, initially, everybody's concerned about the performance and the structures and the handling qualities and any concern that you have on another airplane. And we knew this airplane had to be extremely compromised as far as systems reliability, handling qualities, stability and control, structural margins. Where most airplanes are designed, that most of them that we fly, they are designed for an ultimate yield. That's when you pull it enough, and the wings will break off between 5 and 6 Gs. The Voyager, when we took off, for the first 3 days, we had a structural limit, G-wise, of 1.3 Gs. And that meant just a very little tiny turbulence of any kind would actually break the wings off.
So in December, when you took off, what was the date? December?
It was December 14th.
14th. So what were the last surprises when you got in the plane that day, if there were any last surprises?
Well, another thing that we didn't realize, human factors. How difficult this was going to be physically and also mentally. And if we hadn't have learned some of the things the hard way, unfortunately, the flight of the Voyager would have failed due to human factors. And to a fighter pilot, to fail in front of the whole world and say, hey, I quit, I'm tired. I'd rather cut off both legs with a dull paring knife than do that. But there were some things that were so challenging, they were really beyond our control.
Including?
Well, one is fatigue, obviously, and some other things that we kind of learned the hard way. When we brought the first very easy prototype to Oshkosh in 1974, I set a world distance record between here and Menominee, Wisconsin. And we flew most of the day and set a light category record. But then we flew some other distance records. In fact, those records that we set in the late 70s, when I first got to Mojave from the Air Force, they still stand today. And one of them was a non-stop, non-refuel flight, and it was from Anchorage, Alaska. Think about this. Anchorage, Alaska, this is non-stop, non-refueled, all the way down across, we went from Alaska to Canada to North Dakota to Atlanta, Georgia, to Cape Canaveral, Florida, out over the ocean, and all the way down the last island in the British West Indies chain, which was Grand Turk. And that flight took right at 30 hours, non-stop, non-refuel. But the first one we set, it was a close course distance record, and it was between Mojave, there in the high desert where we lived, up north, up through by the Sierra Nevada, Mount Whitney, and so forth, up to Bishop. And we did that for 33 and a half hours. And that was exactly to the minute that Lindbergh's flight was from New York to Paris. And it was no help. It was all hand-flown. And
how did that affect you as an experience, that kind of time?
Well, we really learned a lot about that. Because, here the guy that got on that airplane that morning, he was one of these arrogant fighter pilots. Hell, I could do anything. I never thought about any human factors or that Dick Rutan would be any way challenged to do that. Holy bananas, was I surprised. Right. Because that night before takeoff, we had some maintenance on it. And Bert really didn't want to, he wasn't interested in records, but I kind of was. And I took his old prototype, and we had some magneto change. And basically, I was working up through midnight to fix this thing. And then we were supposed to get up an hour before dawn so we could weigh the airplane and have it certified and fuel it and get in and do all those certification things. And so I really didn't hardly sleep at all. I was kind of nervous about the big flight coming up, and woke up maybe an hour earlier than I should have. But basically, I was up all day, and only a couple of hours before I took off. We checked in, and the similarities between Lindbergh it was incredible, because he didn't sleep before either. And we showed up to take off just right at dawn, and fueled the airplane and took off and started shuttling back and forth. I guess the daytime wasn't too bad, but when the sun went down, then the fatigue really hit me bad. I started to hallucinate, started to see gremlins talking to me, sitting on my canard, telling me they're going to kill me. But another thing we learned about was sensory deprivation. When you're really busy, like if you're busy doing something that's exciting, and if you're involved in a very pleasurable experience, let's say, time goes by just like that, damn it. But then if it's boring and something you don't like, time progresses agonizingly. Like if a truck rolls up on your legs and you're in excruciating pain, a minute seems to be a lot longer than it used to be. So we learned about how to handle fatigue based on how you process time.
All right, to what extent did this translate over to Voyager from 33 hours to 3 days and nights?
Well, the thing that we learned about that, and we learned the hard way, when I landed after that, I was talking to demons, and I was talking to war, and trying to stay awake, and smelling salts. And
when you were in the airplane?
Yeah, when in the airplane during the flight. And I couldn't believe it. This guy come and sat on my canard, a little black guy. I mean, not a Negro guy, but he was a black elf with the meanest looking face you can remember. And if my canopy hadn't have been there, I could have reached out and grabbed him by the neck. And he was telling me, "You're already dead, Dick. You've already dead." And he described in detail the crash. And he says, now, everybody that dies on planet Earth, this is perfectly normal, that they all feel this way. It's your home. You're reluctant to go. You don't know what, you don't know where he wants to take you, and you're uneasy about that. He says, it's okay, just relax, go to sleep, and come with me. And I tell you what, I had to dig awful deep not to go with him that night.
So how many hours were you flying before you gave up the seat to Gina, who didn't have nearly your flying experience?
No, Gina did not have, unfortunately, that experience. And that was a big problem. There was training issues. Everybody knew that Gina had to do a lot of training. I mean, to be even a reasonable co-pilot for this thing. You know, ideally, Dave, if you and I were going to fly this mission, I have.
Well, of course, you and I would not have fit in that cockpit together.
That's a metaphor, okay. But just to make the point, I have a lot of confidence in your experience. And I know when you're sitting up there driving the airplane that you can handle whatever comes up equally as well as I can. Now, you have a confidence that, and then you can lay down and you can actually go to sleep. But you have to, and then we'd swap positions, and then the other pilot could sleep. But the problem with Gina, she couldn't do any of that stuff. So to answer your question in a minute, when I put her in the seat, and I realized that even if the autopilot kicked off, we're going to lose the airplane. So now that's a high level of anxiety when you're laying back there, and you're a good maybe at least 30, 35 seconds from the controls, and the airplane will come apart in about 15 seconds when it starts uncontrollable pitching. That anxiety level, it really makes it, you got to be really tired to go to sleep. But to answer your question specifically, and we did not know how we were going to handle any of that on the takeoff. In fact, I was talking to Bird and the ground crew, and they says, hey, you just can't do that. There will be a failure for the, because of crew fatigue. And they were probably right, I guess. But in any case, we took off. And now for 5.5 years I've been working on. I mean, this is the opportunity to hang my airplane in a nice museum and give talks and have the honor of meeting David, or y'all, really. So we took off, and I thought, well, we'll just handle it the best we can. But to answer your question, I spent the first day, the first night, the second day, the second night, the third day, and the third night, and the fourth day. And I was going to go into the fourth night and said, I can't do the 4 nights.
So you flew that all?
Yep. I sat in the seat for, 3 nights. But the evening of the fourth day, I was looking at the fourth night, and I said, I don't care how arrogant you are and how great you think you are. There was no fine way you're going to be able to go 4 nights in a row. It just can't be done.
And where were you in the flight? You flew to the west. How far had you gotten at that point?
Okay, we'd gone through Hawaii, and we were just going feet dry into the Philippines. But and I had a protocol. I would never put her in the seat at night, because if she could see outside, maybe she could fly it visually, hopefully. But at night, I just thought there was really no way that she could do that. And so, but all day long, we're fighting weather and fine-tuning it and talking to people and I mean, really busy. But the neat part of the workload on the Voyager was just exactly right. Because if the workload was easy and there was nothing to do, I'd become bored. Remember how you pass the time? And so if you're busy, you're doing something interesting, and you're fine-tuning this thing and looking out for the weather and the winds and communicating with mission control, it's a perfect combination of being busy to control. The biggest problem we had is the perception of the passage of time and how you control that. Like this close course distance record when I had the hallucinations and stuff and no sleep the day before. The second one, we went to Alaska, and we're going to fly to the British West Indies nonstop. Only that one, I was smart that time because I got a whole bunch of sleep.
And I knew I was going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so I changed the circadian rhythm, and I went to bed at 6 o'clock every night for about a week up there. They all went out to dinner, and they're going to movies, and I have to go home and go to sleep because I was bound and determined I was going to get a full night's sleep. And then on that flight, it was to control the passage of time. And every time I would get bored and we'd feel that the time is slowing down a little bit, we had a little tape recorder, and I'd record some really melodramas. Now, us graybeards, we can remember the thing about the little melodramas on the CBS radio mystery hour, The Shadow Knows. And if you get bored a little bit, you just pop in one of those things, and you're listening to it. You're involved in following a little melodrama, and before you even know it, 20 minutes have gone by, and it's not fatiguing. Stuff like that. And we flew all day and all night and landed just before dark at Grand Turk, and the governor came out to meet us. He was really a nice guy, and I crawled out of the airplane, and I felt great. I just felt like I'd had a full night's sleep. I was rested, happy, went out to dinner with the governor, and went to bed normally. So we knew something. We learned something really vital.
Well, when you further on, whoops, here comes an airplane. Mosquito.
Beautiful.
That's coming. And these mosquitoes coming next. At what point did you finally get to sleep and get some real sleep, and for how long?
Right. What we did up until then, I'm not saying I stayed awake for 3 darn nights. I was sitting in the seat, and I would take a cat nap. 5 minutes. I said, Gina, give me 5 minutes of sleep. So she'd stop the watch, and her job was to wake me up in 5 minutes. And that helped a lot more than I thought it was going to do. I said, well, I'm reasonably refreshed. It helped. I don't feel, even after 5 minutes of sleep, I felt a lot better than I did before I went to sleep, sitting in the seat. But the funniest thing happened is when you go to sleep, you're sitting there flying, and then you want to close your eyes, and when you close your eyes, your head falls over. And when you do that, the inner circular canals will feed information into the brain, and every time I would close my eyes, the Voyager would pitch up like that and start to do a half roll. And I'd open my eyes, nope, we're straight and level. What the hell is going on? And so then you do that 3 or 4 more times, and you know the airplane is pitching up and rolling like that. And then you just fight your way through it. No, I'm not going to wake up. I got to sleep. And then every time I'd move my head, the headset would give a different vibration, and it would sound like a main bearing is going, oop, what's that noise? And so you go through all those iterations before you can actually go to sleep. But after about the 3rd day, I could take a slort cat nap in the seat, and she would wake me up. And when I'd wake up, I had absolutely no idea where I was. I looked around, where the heck am I? What are all these gauges up there? My hand? What does all this mean? And I literally, mentally had to go all the way back to Edwards Air Force Base and remember that I took off and I flew, and now we're in Hawaii and Guam, and then catch up, and okay, now I can do it. But then we were going to do a test, and I says, can I wake up quick enough to be useful consciousness, I guess the term, to useful consciousness. If I'm asleep and the autopilot kicks off and the airplane starts porpoising, I got 15 seconds to fix it. 15 seconds is when it comes apart. Can I wake up in 15 seconds to be useful conscious? And the horror was, as I got into this thing, I'd wake up and it took about 30 to 40 seconds to get there. So now what are you going to do? So anyway, I got out of the seat for the first time going into the Philippines, and there was still bad weather. It wasn't really good weather, but I thought, I can't do another night. And so I crawled out of the seat and let Gina fly, or sit and watch the autopilot. And I think I laid out for the first formal sleep. It was about an hour and a half. And then we had a mechanical failure we had to fix. So it seems like every time I got down in the back, something really bad happened.
But when you finally woke up and got back in the seat, were you rested enough to keep it together and not have the dashboard bulge and all of that stuff?
Well, the dashboard bulge was high altitude due to hypemic hypoxia. And that was hypoxic altitude, and that was a really bad thing. But then, even an hour and a half, Okay, all of a sudden, she woke me up and the attitude indicator had failed. I looked at the attitude indicator and it was wings level. Then I looked out the 2 windows and we're banked. And I know we were screwed then. But the attitude indicator was a critical part of the autopilot. And fortunately, because I had doubts about an electric gyros, they'd have high failure rates. And we did bring it back up, thank goodness, or else the mission would have ended there in the Philippines. Anyway, we changed that out. And then when I turned the radio on to listen, the Philippine controllers were apoplectic with anger.
What were they upset about?
Well, I turned it over to Gene and I said, here's air traffic control, talk to them, tell them what they want, where we're going and so forth. Do pilot things on the radio. She wouldn't talk to anybody. She never talked to anybody. And when I finally woke up and got on the radio again, boy, they were upset. And rightfully so. But I knew that if they weren't going to shoot me down, I would be out of Philippine airspace in 3 or 4 hours. And if they were upset, they can send me a postcard to Mojave.
What happened when you got over the mountains of Africa?
The Africa crossing. We were outside of our weather window. We had missed it because of a propeller failure. And the weather department guys, they told me that we were too late and we missed the favorable weather window to go around the world. And so I'm so tired and frustrated and no money and trying to make sure the volunteers show up, and it was just really getting to me. And so I says, Lynn, look, here's what it is. I says, you go back in your weather department and you find me a way around the world. Now, the airplane's not ready yet, maybe a handful of days, but when it's ready, I'm going to open the door, I'm going to walk outside and look up. If it's raining, we'll wait till it stops raining. And as soon as it stops raining, we're going to take it over to Edwards Air Force Base and we're going to fly around the world. And so he went back and came back and said, yeah, Dick, I found another way. Except I can't get you across Central Africa. And so I got a world map out, big world map, California, Europe, all the way to Asia, big map. And I noticed that the Africa part of this thing, percentage-wise, I could hold it on my fingers. Central Africa is about that far, see? Big, long. I looked at that and I says, hell, we'll worry about that when we get there. He was exactly right. Because Central Africa, the jungles, the hot, moist jungles of Central Africa, there's only one other place on planet Earth where the storms are more vicious, and that's the Amazon basin. And any of you that have flown down there and knows that you talk about rain showers, wow, they know about that a lot. And it's the same thing. In fact, in Central Africa, the equatorial trade winds that we were running around the world towards the west with tailwinds, when those huge thunderstorms get going, the equatorial trade winds blow those things out over the Atlantic, and they turn into hurricanes. And those same trade winds that we're flying would carry turn into big hurricanes or typhoons, bad weather, right? And they ravage our southeastern coast of America. But those were right there where those Hummers formed. And at that time, we started climbing and climbing and climbing. And here's a non-pressurized airplane. It started the front engine again, to hell with range. And I'm seeing all these thunderstorms going all over. And the agony of the airplane that goes so bloody slow. Oh, God.
What airspeed most of the trip?
Not too technical, but the optimum speed to fly, L over D, max is what they call it. But when it's heavy, that thing is shifted to the right, and you got to go faster to fly that. Every pound that you burn fuel off, that thing gets slower and slower and slower and slower. So about halfway around the world, we'd be looking at maybe 42 knots indicated.
42 knots?
42 knots indicated. Now, if you got halfway around the world and you got birds going by laughing, I said, the agony of that was horrible. And the only way to deal with that, I kept thinking, God, look at this speed. I look up there, 2 thunderstorms. And then I start heading between them, trying to climb between them. And before I get there, they start joining hands. So then I got to turn around and fly back and fly another one. There was a good part of the time on Africa that W was not anywhere near the top of the compass. And in and out of those things and higher and higher. And we didn't turn our oxygen up high enough. And both of us became severely hypoxic. For another reason, we had checked our oxygen requirements for high altitude, but we were rested. We were feeling fine. Did it in Mojave. Made a little chart instead of taking an SPO gauge that tells what your blood oxygen saturation is. So I had this little chart. Okay, that was going to save us 1.5 pounds because I made a paper chart. Didn't need this little thing in my finger. We made a chart. If you're 18,000 feet, you look at the chart. Gina needs 3.2 liters per minute, and Dick needs twice that, I guess. But she could go to 19,000 feet before she even needed oxygen. And so anyway, I depended on that, but we didn't know that the fact that if you're tired, that the ability for the blood to transfer the oxygen to the lungs, they call it hypemic hypoxia. And boy, were we in deep oxygen deficit. And the thing is that I needed that oxygen, and I didn't know what the next week was going to handle. More high altitude, more icing that we had to deal with.
Or the next 5 minutes.
Or the next 5 minutes, yeah. But anyway, I stayed religiously on that chart, and it was really a bad thing to do. And it's one of those demand oxygen controllers from the medical industry. You breathe in, turn the light on. So I put 2 little LEDs up on the instrument panel. You talk about a Pavlovian response. It's really cool. You breathe in, turn the light on. Breathe in, turn the light on. How many of you use the demand oxygen controllers? They're really a cool thing. They squirt oxygen in your nose only when you're breathing in, not out. And so you can extend the use of the oxygen a lot. So I breathe in, turn the light on. And if you do that for a couple, 3 hours, it's Pavlovian response. You can be down here doing something else, and you breathe in, and peripherally you see that damn light going to come on. And I could do the same for Gina, too. I would monitor her, whether she was getting oxygen. But
How did you get over the mountains?
You know, I don't know. I do not know how we got over it, and I'll tell you why I don't know. We were going higher and higher, and we were going through besides these vicious storms all around. We try to go into an area, and then we turn around, and your heart would leap, and you say, my way out. You've all been in that. The people that fly, you turn around, the weather's worse behind you than it is ahead of you, and your heart sinks, and you got that really horrible feeling. And it's bad enough, but this airplane, you just touch the edge of one of those thunderheads, and the airplane will disintegrate. The mission will end in the jungles of Central Africa, and nobody will ever have a clue about what happened, even if they ever find you. It's so more than once, and I was trying to climb higher and higher and higher as I could get. And then we started to hallucinate. Gina had passed out. She was no longer conscious. Her skin was cold and clammy, and I would shake her. I could feel her skin was cold, and then all of a sudden she would explode into consciousness and didn't know where she was, and her eyes would dart back and forth. There's a scientific word for that, when your eyes dart back and forth. And then pretty soon, I'm in bad shape too, and all of a sudden the instrument panel started blowing out like a big beach ball. And so I'm holding it, see, with one hand. And I'm saying, Gina, help me. Look at this thing. It's blowing out. Well, when you start to hallucinate that bad, you know you're in bad trouble for hypoxia. But the problem with hypoxia, it is an insidious onset, and it's kind of a euphoric effect. It's kind of like a cheap drunk. So if you have an onset that's kind of sneaky and it's kind of pleasurable, well, you can set yourself up in some pretty bad time. But anyway, to answer your question, the next thing that I can remember in doing this book, I was trying for the life of me to find out how we got out of these horrible situations to 6,000 feet with no clouds, perfectly smooth, and cruising out over Western Africa. And I have no conscience of that at all. Absolutely none of how we got there.
Well, you finally did get there, and you got back across the Atlantic, back to Edwards, and you land, right?
Right.
What, 9 days,
3 minutes and 44 seconds.
seconds, right? Worth it?
Well, of course, it was worth it. For 5.5 years, I maintained the motivation. What would it feel like to have accomplished this mission? And because I thought that would feel pretty good, I used that as a motivational device. In fact, it was just barely capable of keeping us going for that 5.5 years. And then we landed at Edwards. Had to beat up the field a little bit too. But what are they going to do to me? I'm Dick Rutan, and we just flew around the world. Nobody's going to get mad at us. So we flew. All these people, tens of thousands of people, come out to see us. They just didn't want to see an airplane land.
The tower? What was your exchange with the tower when you came back in?
Well, before I could see the Edwards complex and that nice runway, even though Bert told me that there's all the people and the press was there and people were lined up way back into Lancaster, it didn't even permeate. The only thing I'm really cognizant of is that it's a restricted area. Now, I've gone in the restricted area 6 times at Edwards, but it was always on the invitation of a word called Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with this airplane. But then this horrible thought is if they won't let us in the restricted area and they won't let us land at Edwards because they're busy and they don't want to mess around with some home-built airplane, then I got to do this whole thing over again. And so I was going to plead with the tower operator to please let us in, and he'd feel sorry for me. And I says, I'm 20 minutes south, and I know you're busy, and I don't want to interfere with any of your traffic. But if you just clear me in and let me land on a remote area of the dry lake, I'd really appreciate that. And he comes back and he says, Voyager 1, this is Edwards Tower. Sir. He's confused. He says, sir, we have canceled flying for today, and we're all here waiting for your return. And I was flabbergasted. They canceled flying? I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar military programs by Lockheed and Boeing and stuff. Not a little home built from some little out-of-the-way town in Mojave 20 miles away. Who would care? But then there was an undercast, and I couldn't see. And right at the edge of the restricted area, at 8,000 foot on top, all of a sudden the overcast ended. And I looked down, and I saw that hallowed ground where Chuck Yeager and Scott Crossfield chased the demons in the sky. To us, that is aviation's hallowed ground, the Muroc Edwards complex. That's where all the big stuff was done. And I looked on the western dry lake, and there was tens of thousands of people who crowded into the western dry lake. And I thought, I could not believe it. They came out here for us. I was flabbergasted. But we finally got down, and they wanted me to fly an extra 30 minutes so I could have an even 9 days. I thought that sounded better. Anyway, we did a bunch of low approaches and buzzed the crowd. And I wanted to let the crowd listen to those little engines that puttered its way slowly around the world. And another thing is a tribute of thanks, because Bert and Gina and I, we didn't do this. We had all kinds of experts that came and did this. It was a total team effort. And then when time is up, Gina put the gear down, and we came down and landed on aviation's hallowed ground, taxied up to that news place. And before I landed, I looked at all its press agencies, all its press cameras all over the place, and I thought, Dick, you better not screw this up, because you'll never be able to buy all that film from them. We touched down and rolled up in front of the crowd. They stayed away so the inspector can come and remove the barographs and remove
the FAA guy.
The FAI guy.
FAI,
the Federation Aeronautic International. They were going to homologate and certify that record. And boy, I wanted that done. I didn't want 8 chances on that thing. And then while they were doing that, when the engines were finally shut down, I closed my eyes and put my head back, and just for a handful of time, and I realized that it felt every bit as good as I'd always imagined it for 5.5 years.
Wow. How does it, yeah. Wow. What's it feel like to join the Wright brothers, Doolittle, Lindbergh, Yeager, to name just a few of the iconic, people of aviation.
You know, one of them
and
you
realize that you're in that handful of names.
It's very humbling, and I'll tell you what happened. There's another person you want to add to that list, Lieutenant Lee Wade.
Why?
You know who Lieutenant Lee Wade? Anybody know? Raise your hand. You know who Lieutenant Lee Wade is. Lieutenant Lee Wade flew the first airplane, the Douglas World Cruisers, around the world in 1924. And when we enshrined the airplane in the National Air and Space Museum, in attendance was Lieutenant Lee Wade. And here's the guy that did it first, period, and the same guy that did it nonstop some, I don't know, years and years later. And what an honor it was to him. But this thing about celebrity status, and to me, I guess I'm like nobody else. Oh man, I'm Dick Rutan. I flew around the world, and I'm this big celebrity, and people, whatever. And it started to go to my head. And the neatest thing happened, and I think that God put this person in the line that day to take care of Dick, hopefully. And he come up, and we're selling the beautiful poster for $10. And I was autographing them all morning, taking. And this individual come up, and he's a young guy, and he come up and he looked at me, and he looked at the poster, and he says, "Yeah, it's really a nice poster." He says, "How much is it?" And I told him, and he says, "Yeah," he thought about it, and he says, "Yeah, I think I'll buy one." And I'm standing there, you know what I'm saying? "Well, do you want it autographed?" And he looked at me, and he looked all around. And he said something, God love him. He looked all around, and he said, "Autographed by who?" Oh, my God. That knocked the wind out of my sails, and hopefully it brought me down to humility again. And I never forget that, about what an honor it is to do that.
What's the title of your book?
When I'm writing the book, I realized that there had been, how many times there had been, when I was looking down a runway or looking out of a cockpit, or coming out of North Vietnam on fire, or the balloon ruptured and we had to bail out, or crashing at the North Pole, or some of the real wild combat missions that I'd been involved in, or flight tests. At the end of the runway doing some weird thing, or some weird airplane. And what I was thinking about at that time, I wonder what the next 5 minutes is going to be like. And I says, "Hey, that sounds like a name of a book." And so it's all based on kind of the life and times of the next 5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dick Rutan.